And he had a comic book with him, and he was like, dude, I love this fucking comic. It's so cool. And it was the first issue of Mouse Guard, a necromancer class, like a real necromancer or a real Jesuit. The Jesuit was my favorite because you could...
A musketeer, a necromancer, and a Jesuit.
Yes. And he's like, can I have a copy? And I said, I don't know. You're going to review it? And he said, if it's good, I'll review it. And so I dead-eyed him. He said that, and I looked at him, and I said, you'll review it then.
They would argue that John Harper doesn't run Blades in the Dark the correct way.
Oh, I'm in their camp.
Hello and welcome to Polishing RPGs, where we have conversation about RPGs with some amount of Polish accents. And today with me I have Luke Crane, a designer. And who are you?
Hey, dzień dobry.
Nice.
I am, as you said, I'm Luke Crane. I'm a game designer specializing in role-playing games. They are my first and one true love. I think they are the greatest games that humanity has ever devised.
Nice.
And I can defend that position. That might take a whole separate podcast, but I can definitely defend it.
So maybe a quick question. So okay, let's get started. Do you think tabletop RPGs are art? Or can they be art? Can an RPG session be a piece of art?
Ephemeral art. Social practice is
big A art, Or maybe you could say high art.
Wow, you're throwing out a lot of terms there. Yeah, I think that it's possible for a role-playing game to be art. Is it possible for a session to be art? I don't know. Maybe. I mean, in a modern art standpoint where art doesn't have to be instantiated, it can be momentary. It can be something, a casual interaction on the street, in a directed or even undirected way. Like certain artists, practice that. So, I know that I've been moved deeply in, as a result of, what happened in a role-playing game session. I think so. I think in the broadest terms, yes. Is it a Rembrandt? No. Can we have a scale of enduring and powerful art, and that can affect just a group of people versus a piece that can affect people over hundreds of years? Yes, of course. Not all art has to be equivalent.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think the RPG as a medium is an interesting one. I mean, I guess games in general, but in many ways, I don't know. I don't know how special is it specifically tabletop or just games conversation in general. But what do you think? Where do you think okay, let's stick to tabletop. Tabletop RPGs in terms of its age, or development as an art. Is it still in adolescence, a teenage years, adolescence, or maybe already mature? What do you feel? Because I guess we could agree that books are pretty much mature as a medium.
Right.
Movies already also seems to have matured, but tabletop RPGs?
Yeah, no, definitely adolescence. Not infancy or childhood. They've taken, they have their fingers and toes, and they, we have books, we have dice, we have cards, coins, all these things. But we don't have very sophisticated ideas about how to use them, right? That's why it's adolescence, right? We've got a lot of feelings, got a lot of emotion, a lot of strong attachments to what we think they are, or what we think they should be. But really, there hasn't been a lot of deep thinking. We don't have a lot of wisdom around the practice of designing or playing role-playing games.
Okay. So, how did you start with role-playing games? What was your first game, first system?
The sequence of events here is a little nutty, but it was a formative summer when I was a kid, probably 85, 86. Right, it would have
Okay.
been uh, maybe a little earlier. Yeah, maybe yeah, 85. That puts me 12. So there was a session of I think one-on-one, like game master and me as a player playing the like a very basic dungeon in the D&D expert book, the Cook expert book, not the Metzner expert book. I remember it very clearly. I still have it. Like
Mm-hmm.
whoever that was,
Hmm.
gave me that book. It was either Ohm or this other kid. And I played a dwarf. I rolled up a dwarf. Dwarf was a class in that edition,
Yeah.
which
Right.
I
Oh, yeah.
find lovely. I bought chainmail and an axe, and I fought a goblin, and it changed my life. It just completely rewired my brain. But I can't remember clearly if that was before or after I had played Marvel superheroes
Hmm.
with some friends. Or if this was the same trip. My mom would kick me out every summer and send me off to my aunt and uncles, or like to get out of her hair. And they had neighbors who had two kids, one my age, one a little bit younger, and they were set up. They had like Marvel superheroes role playing game, and they had Nintendo. So like it was just the summer of love for me. So we made
Hmm.
characters and had our superheroes fight and played a lot of NES pro wrestling, if I remember correctly. Uh,
Nice.
so so yeah, it was. I played a smidge of D&D probably to get me to start. Then we immediately diversified. Like because we played Marvel superheroes, and then when I came back from that trip, I went to my friend and I was like, dude, and he was like, yeah. I I play these with my brother, and I was like, cool. He's like, you want to play a sci-fi game? And I was like, yes. And so he ran Paranoia for me, Kostikian's first edition of Paranoia. But he ran it as a serious, like, dark sci-fi game, like a
Okay.
like an intrigue game, rather than as the kind of parody satire that it was intended to be then and has
Hmm.
really become now. That also changed me. Um, I told that to the designer, Greg Kostikian, at one point at a con. I was like, "Excuse me, grumpy sir, could I tell you a story?" He's infamously grumpy, and uh, and he was like, "What?" And so I told him that one of my first RPG experiences was playing Paranoia, but it's serious. And he looked at me like with bemused, pitying eyes, and he said, "Oh, you poor boy."
Hmm. Oh,
So so good.
oh, interesting. Um, hmm. I'm just thinking, like, we have a friend in common, right? Marcin Sedzi.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's because I know like Sedzi plays a lot of your games. I know he ran a Torchbearer campaign, and he's also a fan of Paranoia. Like that's the person, like I guess the one person in Poland to talk about Paranoia is Sedzi.
Hmm.
So uh, yeah, I guess I don't know. Come on, like similar minds attract or whatever, or great minds think alike. Some would say. Okay, so
Seji feels like a brother to me. I'll be honest. You hear that,
okay.
buddy?
Um, Pozdrawiamy Sedziego, as you say in Poland. Okay, so this is 85 because the important date when I have in my head when I think about you and your games is like 2002. This is Burning Wheel, right?
Yeah.
So this is there's still 17 years before Burning Wheel. So what in general did you play, and maybe like what in general was what did people play in general? What was the culture like of playing tabletop for playing games?
Sure. So I grew up in suburban Boston, which is maybe a little more densely packed than like the typical view of suburban America. The lawns are a little smaller, and the houses are closer together.
Hmm.
Um, and like we didn't have our own house until I was I was a little bit older than that story. So like we lived in apartments and whatnot. Um, so we moved around a lot. I didn't have a stable friend group. But then, I was playing these games, but it was spotty throughout probably 6th and 7th grade. And then in 8th grade, I found my people. And there was a guy, Lepwai, who would run like an impromptu role-playing game during like free period in 8th grade. And that was really inspiring to me. That was a really influential moment. He would use a graphing calculator's randomization function to generate a number from 1 to 100, and that was our die roll in the class. And we all played ourselves, and and he took us through these wacky adventures. And it was probably through those times in class that I met kids who lived in my neighborhood who also played role-playing games. And then, I just got really lucky. One of the guys in my class, Chris Slyman, was he like probably the youngest in his family. I think he had an older brother, older sister. And so he was kind of the golden child, could do no wrong. His parents let him do whatever he wanted, but all he wanted to do was play role-playing games. At least at that point. And
was this considered something like you said that he could do nothing wrong, but role-playing games, was this an exception? Okay, no.
We were on the really just the trailing, slope of the Satanic Panic in the US.
Oh yeah. That's kind of what I meant. Like for a while in Poland, I guess also playing role-playing games was one of those signs that you're your life's over. Basically, you're given into the cult or something. Yeah, but you had the, I guess, somewhat infamous Satanic Panic. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
So what was it like?
I mean, my mom's super cool, so she's not going to buy any of that shit, and she didn't then. But it was like on TV. It was stuff like there would be on talk shows, like these people, talking about this shit or making up all these lies about, role-playing game and suicide and demons and all this stuff. It was weird. And that's how it felt to us watching it. Like we watched it as a family, those things, and it just felt bizarre. But, I went to a Jesuit high school, the next year, and, D&D wasn't allowed. Like, we could play role-playing games, but we couldn't play D&D.
Interesting. Okay.
So this kid later in my second or third year, I think a third year, we had a transfer student from the UK came in, this kid, Ian, and he brought Warhammer with him. And we had heard of it. And I think we'd even tried to play Rogue Trader or something at that point, but he brought Warhammer Fantasy with him, and it was hilarious that was okay to play Warhammer Fantasy, but not D&D.
So what you're saying is that Jesuits had helped to promote Warhammer, basically.
Yeah, in the US. Yeah. They
I mean arguably, I guess it's European setting. I could defend it, maybe, I guess. I mean, partly because I'm just, European, and especially Polish. I'm obliged to defend Warhammer, so...
Yeah, I know. It's in the Constitution.
Yes.
That was a lovely experience playing Warhammer, because Warhammer is much grittier and more graphic than D&D. And we had an AD&D campaign running at that point, so my friend Chris, actually, to touch back on that, the reason why it's important that he was the golden child is because he just had us over at the family table, and they had in the dining room. We just lived there. And we just played role-playing games, in his, in his house constantly. And his parents would invite us to dinner. They'd feed us. They'd give us Pepsi or whatever and make us sandwiches. They were so nice. So nice. And so we would play, in the beginning, we would have on the radio, we would have Guns N' Roses or something. And we'd so we there was a stereo there, big round table, perfect role-playing game table. I can't stress this enough. And so we would play AD&D, but I had a great group of friends. They were very experimental. We played a lot of Marvel superheroes. We played Greg Porter's games. We played Time Lords. We as I said, we tried Rogue Trader, but the rules were incomprehensible. What were some other stuff that we played? Some other weird stuff. I don't know. One of the longest running campaigns was actually my friend Jason, who went on to be a very famous metal drummer. He's in All That Remains. And he ran a Lankmar campaign in using a modified AD&D set. And for years and years, he ran this incredible fucking Lankmar campaign. So yeah. Anyway, so I had a great group of friends. We played a lot of different games. We played for years. And Shadowrun. We adopted Shadowrun when it came out. That was something that was a good compromise for us, because it had the sci-fi and fantasy elements. Though, yeah, and then when I went to New York for school, I kept the Shadowrun campaign running at home, and then started a Shadowrun campaign here in the same world, right in the same timeline, and eventually they were like running neck and neck, and then they merged, and we had this whole thing. It was awesome. We played that for years, but then when we played Middle Earth role playing as well. We tried that a bunch. Not Rollmaster so much. We had some of the Rollmaster books, but we preferred Middle Earth. But then when I moved to New York, I fell in with another incredible crew of people, and we played a lot of Star Wars. The West End Games Star Wars First Edition, run by my friend Toby.
Is it the one that uses D6s?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. With the Force dice and dark side points and whatnot. And then we also played MERP. He loved MERP and Star Wars, and so we would go back and forth. That was hugely influential. Like bouncing around between those three games, like Shadowrun, Middle Earth, and Star Wars, and being a player and a game master, and getting to see how different players reacted to the rules in different ways. This is where my ideas about game design started to form. It wasn't the first game. I actually tried to take my friend Lapwai's game of like us playing ourselves as characters. We tried to design that as a role-playing game. I tried to write down those rules. And we also, my friend Brian and I tried to make a hack of Marvel superheroes that allowed you to play yourself as superheroes in your hometown, but like more in like the Chris Claremont like New Mutants way, where you were mutants with problems. So that was another place where we tried our hand at game design. But
how typical do you think like your experience was? Because sometimes when you hear about role playing in the United States, it's like, oh, it's Dungeons and Dragons. I've played D&D my entire life, 20 years of D&D. How because in your history so far, D&D hasn't really been present. So how common do you think that your experience was? People playing other games than D&D and playing them a lot?
I think I'm in the minority, but I think it's like 60-40 or 55-45. Like I think that, yes, there's a kind of a dominant faction that like in the mid 80s just, fell in love with D&D and just made it their identity. Because this bears out in a lot of market research when TSR went under and was bought by Wizards, and when second edition came out, and that the player base had kind of just had retreated from the light in a way, and just kind of like retreated into their own networks, their own people. So they're really hard to access, and they weren't as engaged, in like new stuff. Like it took a lot of effort to rebuild D&D into something that the public was interested in engaging with again, and some of those players wanted to come along and play. But you have to remember that there was a huge foment of super cool role-playing games happening being published in the U.S. At the time, like so there were a lot of players like me that were playing Greg Kastikian's games. Like, he had Star Wars, he had Paranoia, he had Ghostbusters. You had Greg Stafford, a lot of Gregs. You had Greg Stafford with Pendragon that came out in 85, 86, the first one, and then you had Tweet and Mark Reinhagen, who were experimenting with Ars Magica in the late 80s too, and then which eventually split off into White Wolf and very world-changing game designs. Yeah, and Mike Pondsmith with Cyberpunk, which we also played Cyberpunk. We liked Shadowrun better, honestly, because of the D6s. The dipole system was much more compelling. So there, this idea that people only play D&D, it just doesn't bear out in terms of what games were being published, what the designers were doing, what people were talking about. It certainly was a dominant force, but it wasn't 90% of people only played D&D. It just doesn't make any sense.
Is it the case now that it's around 90% people play D&D, or is it? So did the market become more D&D dominated over time in the US? Or do you think it's still somewhat similar? Just that D&D is just louder and has bigger marketing budgets?
It's it kind of rolls in waves. D&D really did take over the world. 81, 82, 83, even up to 84. I mean, if you've John Peterson writes a lot about this, and especially his last book, Game Wizards. It's hard for us to really understand how wild that 81 to 83 period was, and how many games they were selling, and how they were just a cultural force at the time. And were they the only game being played? No. Were they a super hot rising star in the hobby games world? Absolutely. Were they the biggest games company in the world? Nowhere near it. So right. So one, we have to keep that in perspective, that we're just talking about tabletop role-playing games. But they they flamed out at that point. By the by the next year, by 85, it's all over. The craze is dying down, and people are moving on to other things. You have consoles really starting to take root in the living rooms of America. And then just D&D lost its way in terms of its creative direction and its ability to put out material in a way that the fans appreciated and understood. So yeah, it kind of lost way. And then that picks up again. The wave starts to rise again with Wizards buying TSR and putting out third edition, Ryan Dancy and Jonathan Tweed and Peter Agason were kind of, I believe, the main personalities behind that. But if anyone's listening and wants to correct me, that's fine. And they did a really good job of assessing the state of the game and assessing the state of the role-playing game world, and realizing, what was strong about D&D is that it has this cultural cachet. And so as long as they can kind of build a game up to support that cultural cachet, then basically the idea of role-playing games will support D&D more than it'll support other role-playing games. This is Ryan Dancy's thesis, and it's compelling. Ryan, the OGL originally was a saturation technique to drive other game companies out of the market. The idea that every OGL book that was on the shelves would be one less competitor's book on those same shelves.
Yeah. Interesting, because I've heard an interpretation, a theory that I think the Supreme Court of the United States have declared that the game mechanics cannot be the subject of copyright law. And I've heard the interpretation that Wizards of the Coast basically said, okay, so we might just as well release OGL so that we have some amount of control and influence. Because arguably, some people argue that OGL wasn't really needed in many cases. That people could just release games just based on the ruling from the Supreme Court. So that was a move. But
Yeah, that's an interesting position to take. But remember who you were going against at that point. You're going against once again, one of the hottest, most powerful game companies in the whole world. It wasn't that you were going against like, Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, and the Bloom brothers, or Lorraine, whoever, like, who are arguably bad at business. You're going against Magic the fucking Gathering.
Yeah, it's maybe you are right, but do you really wanna test it in court against a huge corporation who's kind of litigious? Yeah. Right.
So, and they were prepared to defend their rights in court. I know this for a fact. And then soon after, they hit that peak, they sell to Hasbro, and now you're going to test it against an even worse, bigger pain in the butt.
Yeah.
So a team of lawyers, that is. So anyway, so you see this another huge rise about 20 years ago, and that I think that they elevated themselves to a new plateau, but I don't think that the three, I don't know, Ryan and I can argue about this, but the numbers that John Peterson recently published are pretty staunchly in favor of the basic set being the most influential D&D product ever.
Okay.
And so I don't know if 3.0 hit those heights again. I don't think it did. But it still put them back into like like the position of driving culture. And then, then it falls off, like 4.0 doesn't hit well. But once they release 5, though, now you have another massive shift in technology. And once you incorporate, desktop streaming technology like this, with fan culture, and then you add the mix of like kind of C and B tier Hollywood stars playing these games and like creating so now you're mixing like visual media fandom with games fandom. It's quite a powerful recipe, and that has changed things now. Like, arguably, Wizards is no longer in control of the D&D brand. It was pretty clear when they were launching 5th edition that they had lost control. Like, again, like almost like they had lost control in the 90s.
But you could argue that like last year with it was like 6 months ago or something, with the OGL debacle, like they kind of tried to rein the brand in under their control, Yeah, okay. So this is happening. Okay, because I'm trying to picture basically how much of an outsider you were back in the 90s when you were playing games, whether you were still. Because again, I'm kind of surprised. Maybe that says more about me and my expectations from US, but it's some parts of me expects everyone in US to play a significant amount of D&D. And that you may like it, you may hate it, but you still play it because everyone does, because that's US. But it doesn't seem to be the case.
Like I said, we did play quite a bit of AD&D in there, and like my friend's Lankmar campaign, and then another one of our friends was a game master and ran us through some stuff. Like, we all took turns game mastering, and we all had a run of AD&D. But what's really significant though is after moving to New York and playing a lot of Star Wars and Shadowrun and Middle Earth role playing, and I played actually in another dear and influential friend of mine, Ian Marshall. He ran his own role playing game for the role playing game club at university, called Magician, and that was hugely influential. But in I think 93, 94, I was actually rather nostalgic for AD&D, And I got a group of my Shadowrun players together, and I said, hey, I want to run a D&D campaign. I want to play Lost Isle of Castanamir again, which is a fantastic, ridiculous, and deadly D&D adventure. And I was like, you want to do this? And they said, sure. And that was weirdly like a hugely important step on the path to Burning Wheel, was to go back in time to 77, 78 and try to play now with our new ideas, our new capabilities, our new desires for outcomes in role-playing games. And and so then for years I was playing just Shadowrun and AD&D, and I got incredibly frustrated. And around the same time, it must have been maybe a year into it. I remember talking to another friend of mine saying, like, we got to design our own game. This sucks.
Okay, I see. Was the Burning Wheel your first game?
No, I had designed a handful of games prior to this, unpublished. Burning Wheel is the first one that I published. But and honestly, we didn't set out to design a fantasy role-playing game. We wanted to fix Shadowrun. We set out to design like a near future speculative like sci-fi game. And we worked on that probably like 94, 95 into the 2000s. We kept going. And then in 98, one of my dear friends was coming down to New York to visit, and 97 maybe, or maybe it was the fall of 97. And so I surprised him. I took the rule set that we were working on for that other game, and I converted it to fantasy, because he's a much prefers fantasy. And maybe it was his birthday or something. I don't know. But I did it for him and another guy, one of my roommates. I basically surprised them with like the first Burning Wheel rule set that we were going to play that weekend for our gaming session. So yeah, I didn't even start out wanting to make a fantasy role-playing game. I did it as a lark. I don't even like fantasy role-playing games. I don't even like fantasy. I much prefer sci-fi.
Said the man best known for fantasy role-playing games. Actually, hilarious. So the way I have learned about the Burning Wheel, and actually about indie RPGs, is a talk that's published on YouTube. There are those two guys. I know their names. It's Rim and Scott. I don't know the last names. They gave this talk. It's called Beyond. I think it's called Beyond Dungeons and Dragons, or some variation of this. It's like they do it like on Comic-Cons, whatever, and they basically say that Warhammer, D&D, Shadowrun, GARPs, whatever, this is all the same game, and because the principle of playing is basically the same, it's just it changes what dice you roll during combat, but yeah, the game master is going to run an adventure. In the end, you're going to fight some guy in a warehouse in Shadowrun, or maybe in a forest in a D&D, but same thing. And there's a bunch of games, and those guys were just huge Burning Wheel fans. I think one of them tells the story where he met you at a convention, and you were this crazy guy that there was always this guy who's like, I fixed D&D because I've made this insignificant change. But he said that you forced him to play, and after a session, he was like, oh my God, this is really awesome. And then, it happened. So that's the story.
I didn't force him. Okay. I did not force him to play. He wanted to play. We ran good demos in those days, and we had a very exciting table, and there's a lot of people like cheering and groaning and whatnot. Like we had good energy, and they were really nice, and they came over and they said, all right, let's give it a try. And we had a good time. We had a really good time.
Were there any other, I would say, like indie games around that time? Because I think this is so by indie game, okay, maybe indie game is a wrong word, but just games that really tried to do something very different than what other games were doing. Because as I said, you could argue that Warhammer, Shadowrun, D&D, they are different in many ways, but in many ways they are very the same. Like the sessions are gonna go very similar between those games. Like nowadays, I would call them, drawing from the article of Six Cultures of Play by retired adventurer, I would call them traditional games, trad games. But yeah, in many ways, thousands of games, but all the same. So the Burning Wheel is different. Were there any?
It is.
Yeah, was it like the first major different game, or was the scene already developing?
As I said, like there were plenty of spiritual forebears from the 80s, and the same in the 90s. I mean, you have Unknown Armies and Greg Stolze's games, but
there's also there's also Dallas tabletop role-playing game, which we found recently. It's a game that could be published nowadays as a Gauntlet PBTA game, and nobody would notice. And it was released in 1980 or something. It's
right. Yeah, I mean, the James Bond role-playing game from the same period is also really innovative. But anyway, so I actually cut myself off from like probably 98 to 2002 for those 4 years. I just went into my monk's cell, closed the door, and just worked on Burning Wheel. And we only played Burning Wheel during those years. I wouldn't let us play anything else. Or unless we were like playtesting another one of our own games. But really, I just wanted to stay super focused. So I was out of the scene. I didn't know what was coming out. The last I heard, before I shut the doors of my crypt, there were, was like, White Wolf games. Like I wasn't even aware. I wasn't even aware of what Wizards of the Coast was doing with D&D, because like, we had just completely isolated ourselves. But I very quickly ran into some folks online that started to speak a similar language to me. And then probably the second event, not the first event, I remember that was in Michigan. Like the first couple events I went to, people were basically like, why should I play your game and not D&D? That's all they wanted to talk about. Which is fun. It's real fun. But so a few months after we published, so this would have been early 2003, I met a gentleman named Michael S. Miller, who's a game designer, and he said, hey, what you're doing is super cool. You should come talk to us on the Forge on indie RPGs. Like you'll meet a lot of people that are doing similar things. And I said, I don't know. I don't want to talk theory. I want to design games and, and try to sell the 1,000 copies of this fucking book I just made. And he's like, all right, cool, whatever. Michael's the fucking sweetest. But Michael had made with Jason Roberts a game called Fulminata at that point, which has been hugely influential on me. So I eventually make my way over to the Forge, and Sorcerer is there, Inspectors is there, Kill Puppies for Satan is there.
That game would be very warmly welcomed during the Satanic Panic.
Yes. If you can read Vincent's collection of hate mail that he got about that game, it is sublime. It is totally worth your time. But right, I found a lot of people. Universalis was another one that was there, and the designers of those games: Ron Edwards, Vincent Baker, Jared Sorensen, Ralph Mazza, Mike Holmes. Paul Sega was there, though My Life with Master wasn't out yet, so there was probably Nicotine Girls was out, if I remember correctly. Anyway, it turns out there was a bunch of designers collecting their ideas and thoughts around this stuff. What I really liked, that more than the game designs, which like I respected, what really drew me to them was their ethos around publishing, in that the designer should own their work. The designer should be in charge of saying, if the game stays out of print, like, what the art is. The designer should be the one who collects the royalties and disperses them, et cetera, et cetera. I follow a lot of small, independent music labels, a lot of underground stuff, a lot of punk rock, and I followed a lot of like underground comics, as well as mainstream comics, and watching those artists like in those communities get exploited by big publishing houses was very formative to me as well. And so like this idea that the designer can make these decisions themselves and be in control of the publishing was very powerful to me. And also, like Ron said, like publishing is not a big hardcover glossy color book. Publishing can be a document on your website. It can be a PDF. It can be a zine. It can be a CD. It can be a book. All these things. Like you get to say what published is. I just think,
how widespread is the internet at this point in the US?
Very widespread.
Okay.
But I mean, not as widespread as it is now. Like we didn't have internet on our phones. So
but can you assume that most tabletop RPGs players have access to the internet?
Many.
Okay.
I would, sure. The most, if we're talking simple mosts, then I would say that it was a very active online community.
Okay, so it seems like also
RPGNet was in existence.
Okay, so like the internet publishing also like becomes possible because of the internet, and seems
role-playing game publishers, one of the first communities to adopt digital publishing, like PDF publishing. The other early adopter community, unsurprisingly, software developers who were publishing software manuals. They would publish them digitally because publishing those in paper is a waste. So you see a confluence of all these factors around this time, which enables us to do what underground communities are good at, right? You have desktop publishing has become cheap and ubiquitous. So you can make a nice looking PDF or file for a book. Print on demand publishing is of reasonable quality. So you can start doing short runs if you want to go that way. But most important, I cannot stress this enough, payment processing becomes cheap and accessible for everyone through PayPal, or not through everyone, through most people, right? As long as you have a credit card. And so having a safe, easy payment processing method, so you can pay $10, $20, whatever for my PDF to get my game, or not even PDF, like pay me to get the game and I'll ship it to you. This kind of trifecta of factors allows us to connect as a community now, where we go from just talking about things on the internet to making things on the internet now to buying things from one another. Like we're talking about them, we're making them, we're buying them. That is how underground communities go mainstream.
Yeah. I remember when I was talking to Ron Edwards, I think he meant that role-playing games are the best when the scene is small. And basically, as soon as big money gets in and those games get huge and get huge, colorful books, the quality goes down. I think he argued that the best periods for publishing games were like the first 10 years of role-playing games, when it was just those weird people with their weird games back in the store, and then the early ages of digital. And then after that, it gets corrupted by money and publishers.
Oh, I'm one of the corruptors. I don't agree. I mean, Ron has basically said this, that the stuff we were doing was offensive to him. So I don't agree that color is the determining factor about whether a game is productive or progressive or meaningful. That's not true. I think you can't make that argument with Mouse Guard in existence. Like, I don't know.
You'd have to argue that black and white Mouse Guard would be better, right? And probably with half as much illustrations.
Sure.
It was it's maybe I don't know.
So I mean, I love weird. I love underground. But I also love iteration. I love seeing a community in conversation with itself, and taking ideas, being inspired, and reincorporating them or remixing them, building on them. I mean, right? You can't make that like Ron's argument in regard to Blades in the Dark, or Apocalypse World. Like these are like epochal shifts in role-playing game design, like that. Yeah, that like the period from like Mouse Guard to Blades in the Dark, like right there, like there just are some major improvements made in the technology of role-playing games. And right, and now I feel like we've reached kind of another like plateau. I don't know. I gotta dig into more about what's being published right now, but we're just poised for another big leap where people start taking Blades, which I think is one of the most refined role-playing games out there, and exploring new ground with it, and or digging into the stuff that doesn't work in Blades and trying to unpack why it doesn't work and improve on it.
Yeah, I'm one of those people. I have my own game. I like designed to run a campaign, and like the basis of the game is Blades in the Dark. Pretty much. I mean, the philosophy, not like it's not a Blades in the Dark hack, but it's just the philosophy is so good. I just could not. I started with D&D in many ways. I wanted to adjust D&D, but ended up doing more Forged in the Dark anyway, because just the assumptions are so solid. The position, the effect, the basic negotiation, and so on. It's so solid. Yeah, like for me, there's no going back. Like I cannot play any more games. I mean, John Harper didn't invent this, but like yes, but partial successes with consequences. Yeah. Like I can no longer run games without those. Even if I would run D&D, I would incorporate partial successes into interpretation.
Yeah. It's a great piece of tech.
Yeah.
The earliest appearance of it is either in Inspectors or the Pool. So it's like it's almost 20 years old when John adopts it for Blades. But it's fantastic.
And of course, like before it was in the Apocalypse World, of course. And then, but it's just like a lot of those ideas started appearing. Maybe like the period of 2010 and later was a period when a lot of those ideas that were already there were just codified in some games that achieved success.
I'm sitting right here, man. 2008, Mouse Guard has yes, but in it in terms of twist and condition. It has no and yes, but in it. So 2008, man.
Sorry. Oh, sorry. But I mean, like, but I guess case in point is like, but it's the PBTA games that are known for it and not Mouse Guard, because sometimes it's not the person who invents the idea, it's the first person who achieves success with it. So it's kind of the marketing people rule the world. For fuck's sake.
Vincent's terrible at marketing.
Yeah.
All right. So my point about Blades isn't that it was innovative. At least it had some innovative parts, but one of the stunning things about Blades is how highly refined it is, how it manages to incorporate and adopt many innovations in role-playing games from the previous 20 years prior to its development, and produce a very slick, coherent, satisfying game from it. That is a feat. It's one thing to make a game and incorporate, like one novel mechanic that kind of, lives on throughout it. But for John to be able to kind of understand, what he loved about Apocalypse World and Torchbearer and Mouse Guard and Shadow of Yesterday and Sorcerer and Inspectors and whatnot, and to remix them into the whole that is Blades, that's an achievement. That is real design. It's incredibly difficult to do.
Yeah. Blades in the Dark have sold me on some ideas that I've read first in Apocalypse World, but just didn't. I've read them, knew them, but it was Blades in the Dark that sold me on them. I guess Progress Clocks was one of those. It's just better explained, better integrated. With all due respect to Vincent Baker, it just, Blades was very good as a finished product and not. I don't know, just overall quality. Is very persuasive. Or just how
I agree.
Yeah, how Blades in the Dark is very good at giving it's very easy to get a satisfying game of Blades in the Dark that will make all the mechanics work. I guess it kind of requires less skill than maybe running PBTA would. Maybe that's difficult. As with many great topics, interesting topic, it's complicated. I know some people don't like the board game aspect of Blades. Maybe in many ways, Blades introduces those mechanics by some processes and some game phases that put these into procedures, which is nice, but also makes some people feel this is board gamey and then they'll like this, and so on. But overall,
that's a silly. I think that's a silly position to take. Games have rules. Role-playing games have rules. Board games have rules. Video games have rules. Card games have rules. They all have rules. And Blades does not have a board. You're not moving pieces on the board. It's not a board game. And saying that
kind of depends how you define a board game. Because you could argue that in some procedures of Blades in the Dark, you have to stay in meta. You have to stay in meta to take some actions in downtime, and then you only and then you create fiction you put those into fiction. The process, you're taken more or forcibly. You cannot do this in fiction like you can in D&D, I guess, even though, let's say, D&D has a very crunchy combat, right? You spend a lot of time doing numbers and rules during D&D. But I think maybe all those little rules have still you can tie them into fiction. You don't have to go out of the fiction for longer periods of time. And in Blades, the procedure structure, I'm kind of mixing two arguments right now. But so what one is length of time, so maybe that playing downtime can take you out of fiction for 15 minutes maybe. And that some people don't like that and would say that is board gamey, even though, nothing new rules in RPG. And the other argument is that no, that would be third argument. I wasn't prepared for this for the discussion, so my arguments are a mess. But you can argue.
There are very few role-playing games that allow for this ideal of complete immersion, and I would say no tabletop games allow for it. Only maybe some of the Scandinavian LARP stuff, but even those games have to afford the player time to an in-between space for them to get into character and get out of character, right? And to decompress, have cooldown, right? Which is, you're still playing the game, but now you're in a meta space for either of those. Even though once you're on stage, you're in flow of the game, you're not allowed to break character. You have to do all these things. But then the games have safety mechanisms. You're allowed to hit a green room and have some time to yourself. So again, there's meta to those games.
I could see an argument against safety tools for the sake of immersion. Although we would be reaching dangerous levels of immersion.
Some of those games have deliberately say that there is no eject button. There's no safety tool. Some of them really do want to push you into these dangerous situations and have you experience these very difficult emotions. And I think that's a very valid way to play as long as you're willing. I don't think it's valid to trick someone into that. That's all. But D&D, all of the children of D&D have a sine wave of immersion where there are moments where you're deep in it. You're speaking in character. You're trying to make decisions, through the perspective of your avatar, and then you pull out of it. You've won the combat, and so you're totaling experience points, or you're calculating your loot, or whatever. Or before you even get into a situation, you're looking at your resources. What magic do I have? at my disposal? What kind of synergies are there between my character and this other character? What are the goals that we have? Or what is the game master thinking right now? My friend seems upset. What are they thinking right now? Like all of that stuff that happens up here that is not a part of like saying the cool thing,
Yeah.
they're part of the game, and it's perfectly natural to have this kind of flow throughout the game, and to try to resist it or say that, to acknowledge or even have rules that shape how we come into and out of this phase is some kind of antithetical to role-playing games. It's just nonsense.
Yeah, I think that people who argue against Blaze in the Dark because it's a board game, I think the argument isn't that much about immersion. It's mostly, maybe the structure is the main culprit here. So the fact that for some people it's very important that all their decisions are possible within the context of a fiction itself and nothing else. It's like we went to the dungeon because we needed gold, and we woke up and made a plan and went to the dungeon. And it Blades in the Dark, you're going to have, why are we doing a score right now? Because that's what this game structure tells us to do. It's not really like we cannot not do a score. I mean, we are still confined with the game phases defined kind of strictly by game mechanics. We have to do an engagement roll. We have to do a score using those principles. We have to do entanglements. I think that's that's what bothers some people. Not that much immersion, but just the limitation on their freedom of doing whatever they want whenever they want.
Right, but I think that's an illusion.
Yeah, or you could argue that's a price that's very well worth paying in Blades, because you get much more out of it due to that. And because in D&D, when you don't have this structure, I mean, the structure has to be imposed by the game master. And there you are, running your linear adventure where you can do whatever you want, but actually you can't.
Right, so, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's right. Either it's a cost you willingly pay to get better results. That's kind of Ron's theory, is that, yeah, you can just sit there and talk at each other and flip a coin or whatever and hope to come up with some good results. Or you can all agree to certain structures or limitations and whatnot that drive you to his story now stuff, to his narrativism, and get you there quickly and start producing more meaningful results more efficiently. And then just the illusion that, like, in D&D, that you can do whatever you want. It's just not true. It's a silly thing to say. I know that we love this idea of freedom in Western culture, that we love to think that we are completely free to do as we will whenever, but it's just not true.
Freedom it's a somewhat complicated concept. Okay,
sure.
So the Burning Wheel gets released. How does it go?
Yeah, terrible.
Oh,
absolutely terrible. I published 1,000 books, but it was a 2-book set, so it was 2,000. I had them delivered to my apartment in New York. Fortunately, we lived in a loft at the time, so I could have 2 pallets of books in my apartment. And we published around October 31st, so Halloween in the States. And in the next 8 months, I guess, I sold about 240 of them, of those sets, which is not terrible, but also is not 1,000.
Yeah.
There's quite a few of them sitting in my apartment.
How did you sell them? Internet orders?
Yep, direct orders. We put up some signs at the local game shop, and we set up a shopping cart, like a little store on the site, and then we started to talk about the game on RPGNet, which led to people being mean to us on RPGNet, which led to us fighting with them on RPGNet. And I'll tell you, a flame war on RPGNet, that sold 200 copies of the game right there. But Yeah, we went to cons. We did events, and we would sell a few at events. Like sometimes we would sell one, sometimes we would sell a handful. But then IndieRPGs.com, the Forge, had a booth at Gen Con, and that Ron orchestrated. And I asked if I could be a part of it, and they said sure. And it was one of the kindest gestures that any human has ever made to me. They didn't really know me. I mean, I had met, Michael S. Miller on the road, but we weren't friends yet. And Clinton R. Nixon had bought a copy because of the Flame War. He had bought a copy of Burning Wheel and had looked at it and said that it was okay, but kind of crufty, which is true. It's a cogent analysis from Clinton. The first edition of Burning Wheel had a lot of cruft. But they said, yeah, your share will be this, and come along. And I'd never been to Gen Con before. It was just a life-changing experience. Like, to be surrounded with people who all had the same goal to make cool role-playing games and get them into people's hands, and who are supporting one another doing it. I met Jake Norwood, Jürgen Mayer, Ron Edwards, obviously, Jared Sorensen, Renee Knipe. Renee was the coolest person in the world. Renee had published a Sorcerer supplement that whose name escapes me at the time, but very gritty and dark, super cool. And Renee just looked at the Burning Wheel books, which we were selling for $15 at that point, and just was blown away. It was like, this is the coolest game here. And just stood in the aisle at Gen Con, and just flogged it, and was just like, you got to check out this game. You got to check out this game. And I just had no idea what was going on, why people would be so nice. So it was just a wonderful experience. Ron was a great mentor. And then Ken Hite came to the booth and was basically looking for free games, but also the new hotness. He wrote a column for a website at the time called Out of the Box, and he did a roundup of Gen Con every year. And so everyone was trying to get their games into Ken's hands. And I was running a demo, and Michael S. Miller came over to me in the demo. He's like, Ken's here. He wants to know about your game. Mm-hmm. And I was like, whatever. I'm running a demo. This, whatever. Like, he just wants a game for free. And Mike's like, well, true, but come on. And so he dragged me over there, and Ken's like, tell me about the game. And I told him a little bit about it. He's like, it sounds interesting. And he's like, can I have a copy? And I said, I don't know. You're going to review it? And he said, if it's good, I'll review it. And so I dead-eyed him. He said that, and I looked at him and I said, you'll review it then. And he went, and he did review it, and he said really nice things about it. And about the nicest things anybody had ever said about anything I'd made at that point. Basically he said it's raw, but it's full of good ideas, and he wants to see more. What an incredible thing for an industry veteran to say to a novice like myself, just mind blowing. And that was it. After that, we sold those other 760 copies.
Okay.
It took about another year. So that was 2003. So yeah, the next Gen Con, we were selling our last case of Burning Wheel, and then that's when we decided that we would revise it and put out another edition. We had learned a lot. We had published the Monster Burner at that point as well. Just having people be supportive, nurturing, it's just super important. And I've tried to replicate that. I've tried to be a similar mentor, advisor, supporter to folks in the last 20 years myself.
I see. Nice. I'm assuming this then led to the Burning Wheel Gold, right?
Well, led to Burning Wheel. Are you? No, man. Holy shit.
No? Okay.
Burning Wheel Revised. Under a Serpent Sun, Blossoms Are Falling.
Okay.
Dark Elf Supplement.
Okay, so it eventually led to Burning Wheel Gold, but this was a long way. Okay.
Burning Empires, Mouse Guard, Free Market.
Wait. Burning Wheel Gold is after Mouse Guard?
Yes.
Holy okay, sorry. Okay, I don't know what I got. Okay. I was mistaken.
We published 2 more books for Burning Wheel. So we had, we divided things up into small paperbacks at that point. The Burning Wheel, the Character Burner, the Monster Burner, and then we published the Magic Burner in 2008, the same year we published Mouse Guard. And then the next year or the year after, it was maybe 2010, we published the Adventure Burner, and the same year we published Free Market. In 2007, we did Blossoms. What did we do in 2009? I don't remember. Okay. Yeah. So, and then in 2011, we did Revised. Gold, rather. Excuse me. We did Gold.
Okay. Holy shit. I had my dates wrong. So how did Mouse Guard happen in between? Like, what was that story?
Well, we had done in 2005, after we published Revised, we were feeling pretty good. We had won some maybe indie RPG awards or something. I don't know. We were feeling real cocky. And so we reached out to Christopher Moeller, who was the author artist behind one of our favorite comics, Iron Empires. We felt like it would be a good match for Burning Wheel to do a licensed game. And he was down. He had a D20 version in the works, but it wasn't going anywhere. And so he signed on with us, and we produced Burning Empires. And that won an Origins Award. And that was also a big, shiny, glossy book. Lots of color art, gorgeous stuff that absolutely offended Ron Edwards' sensibilities.
Nice.
And so then the next year, 2007, we were at a con with Clinton R. Nixon, and he had a comic book with him, and he was like, dude, I love this fucking comic. It's so cool. And it was the first issue of Mouse Guard. And I knew the publisher of Mouse Guard, Mark Smiley. And so I introduced them because Clinton's a great game designer. And so I thought something had happened. And Clinton designed a game called Tiny Triangles to, like as a kind of super stripped down indie RPG version of Mouse Guard. But the author, Dave Peterson, didn't feel like it, best represented Mouse Guard. And so he and Mark approached me. They said, at Comic-Con one year, they said, would you be interested in taking a crack at Mouse Guard? And I said, sure. Because I had already done a licensed comic RPG. And so, yeah, through 2007 and 2008, we worked on Mouse Guard really intensely, and worked with David. And it was a very difficult period. It was really hard, but we did all right. And the game turned out fantastic. David was skeptical of our design methods at first, but ultimately was on board. Was really supportive, answering my questions at 2 a.m. like about the world and how things should work and whatnot. And so 2008, and then Mouse Guard won some awards, I think. I don't know. I think Mouse Guard won an Origins Award too, so it did really well. And Mouse Guard is probably our best-selling game, though we don't publish it. We worked with David's comic publisher to publish it.
Okay.
So yeah, we're just the designers for Mouse Guard.
Okay. And then it's Freemarket, right?
That was 2008. I think the next system we published was probably Freemarket. That was 2010. We were working on Freemarket from probably 2008 to 2010. Which Jared Sorensen and I did in conjunction with Peter Axon and Paul Peterson at Hidden City Games. It was actually originally intended to be a digital game, and the pen and paper game was a prototype but we lost funding, so we just published the prototype. We published a pen and paper game.
Okay. What was like? How did the idea for Freemarket came about? I haven't played the game. Don't know that much about it, but I think the most of my knowledge I have is again from those guys that from the Beyond Dungeons and Dragons panel. Freemarket is like is post scarcity society, right? And it seems like the purpose of the game is like, what do you do in a society that like you want for nothing?
It's post it's not post scarcity. There's actually very scarce resources on Freemarket. It is a post death society, and it is a post monetary currency society. It's a reputation based economy to help deal with the scarcity of resources. But no one goes without basic needs met. When you're on a space station, you can't have people starving. It doesn't make any sense. So Jared and I were given we were both worked for Hidden City Games at the time, and Peter gave us kind of his classic box to draw in, like, how would you design a role-playing game for digital medium? We said, well, it should be a sci-fi game so it could play to the strengths of the digital medium. It'll feel sci-fi when you're playing it. But we wanted to do something a little different. Like most sci-fi games are like pirate romance games, like Star Wars is just pirate romance, or dystopian future stuff. And, neither of those things really excite us. And we also wanted kind of like medium hard sci-fi. And we didn't want to have to deal with relativity too much. So we thought like basing something in the solar system would be the most useful for us. So so we looked at contemporary fiction. We love the Ian M. Banks stuff, but that's like big, galaxy spanning sci-fi, the Werner Vinge stuff. But the Cory Doctorow book, Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom, that resonated with us. We were like, okay, this is cool. This is kind of, medium hard sci-fi, reputation economy, near speculative future. It's kind of funny. It's not like dark dystopian. There's nothing rusting or corrugated steel, exposed wires, like bullshit. So we went with that. We wanted a future that seemed bright, but that had a lot of problems when you looked at it. Also, we wanted to make sci-fi the way it was intended, that it's a commentary on the problems of our day. And so the game is about social media and about wrestling with these ideas of possible new economies and the difficulties of space exploration. Right? Like, one of our premises for the game is that it turns out that humans need a lot of data to survive in space, but human bodies are terrible at surviving in space. And so those things combined mean that they had to develop technology to basically regrow human bodies and then rewrite their data into them, so that people, when they inevitably died of like all the horrors of space, they could just be reprinted and put back together. And that was kind of the basis of one side of the game. And then we tried to adapt the idea of Woofy from Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom into a social currency for role-playing games. And it is really fun, though. We used a card-driven system, a novel system, because we felt like that would translate better into the digital space. But man, people do not like novel role-playing game systems. They really enjoy rolling a D20 to say 20, woo! And we wanted something a little more strategic So we had a lot of
Okay.
uphill battles there.
I mean,
It's a pretty
yeah.
successful game, but it's one of our worst selling games. People role
Mm.
playing game folks, at least in 2010, did not want a novel, bright futured sci-fi game.
Oh, interesting. Um, I'm assuming you also had. I mean, it was worldwide. Many people recognize that there was a tabletop RPG like drought or just a recession, I could say, on the market, 2005 ish. Until 2020-ish, like 2018, just less games published, fewer games published, fewer games played. Just some people speculate it was the rise of MMORPGs video games. Some people speculate it was Magic the Gathering. I don't know, have heard many interpretations, but would you agree that there was just less people playing, fewer people playing tabletop RPGs during those 10, 15 years?
I think there was a recession after 3.5 really just tanked the fucking market. And so I think a lot of players washed out. I think a lot of the players who were playing the games they loved in the 90s continued to do their thing. I think a lot of the players who came in for 3.5 just burned out, started families, moved on. And then the OGL model just it can't you shouldn't neglect that it destroyed the retail market, because it created this burden, right? Like Ryan Dancy's idea of like this OGL book that's on the shelf knocks out a competitor. Yeah, that's great to knock out the competitors on the role-playing game shelf, but that book doesn't sell. Right? Those OGL books just sat there for years, and creating this undue burden on the retailers. And so the retailers shifted away from that kind of product to just focusing on core sets of well-known games and card games. Magic continued to be a very strong seller. And then sure, you have World of Warcraft scratching a lot of itches during that period for role-playing games. So I don't know if it was a major recession in terms of playing base. There certainly was a lot of innovation happening in the space. But we didn't have streaming platforms in the same way. Like that culture wasn't there. And so at the very least, it was a plateau. And retailers, just were dying in droves through a variety of factors. There was no Kickstarter really until, no viable Kickstarter model until like 2011.
Okay.
But by 2012, 2013, like 2012, you see Dungeon World on Kickstarter and doing very well, raising like $80,000 or $90,000. And then Fate in 2013 or something, or I think doing very well. So the things begin to turn around about 10 years ago for role-playing games in terms of like the viability of their product. And now they're hot again. Now,
it seems like it was the dark age before the renaissance, which is happening right now. I guess you could say that we're like the industry seems to be booming right now. Like we'll see where it goes, but
it'll crash again. But
probably at some point,
now,
but it's the dark ages and golden ages. They're just one after the other. What about Torchbearer? What was the short history of that game?
So 2009 maybe. Tor Olafsrud, our Burning Whales editor-in-chief, was running a mouse guard game called something like In the Dungeons of the Moss Lord or something. I don't know.
Okay.
And had very fantastical elements. And he just started to noodle with the idea of mouse guard as a more traditional fantasy game. And, he was talking to me about it from time to time. And we were doing a lot of stuff, 2009, 2010, we were working on other books and, Freemarket and whatnot. And eventually I asked him to show me his notes and to like walk me through it. And I was blown away. I was like, this is all super cool. Do you want help? And he said, yes. And so we started playtesting. And we play tested, so probably about 3 or 4 years. My memory wants to say 4 years, but so maybe like right away in 2009. But anyway, play tested quite a long time, and then we did a Kickstarter project. Once I was already working there, I wanted to see how it was to use the platform, and try to understand the experience from the user perspective. So we did a Kickstarter project in early 2013 for Torchbearer, and it did fine. And so we kept it in print for a number of years, but we decided that we would revise it eventually, and then that took about another 4 years for us to pull off. And then we released that a couple of years ago, Torchbearer Second Edition, which is lovely. It's absolutely culmination of our skills as designers. It's a really intricately designed game. It's very tight, really easy to run, very supportive. I
think I've skimmed through the first edition, but maybe I'll give a second a look.
First edition's nice. It has a lot of cool ideas in it, but it was only ever meant to be the first part. And once we started making the second parts for it, we realized that we just wanted to like smooth everything out and like build a better experience.
The people who play Torchbearer, like I've met some people like, oh, we're playing a game, like everyone was miserable. It was amazing.
If they're into it,
that's a game. That's a game. Kickstarter. You mentioned you worked on Kickstarter. How did that start? Like how maybe. I guess the Kickstarter as a platform is a huge topic that I don't think we have time as the role of a Kickstarter in games, which is like, it seems that every single tabletop RPGs nowadays is released on some form of Kickstarter.
Sure.
So how did that happen? I mean, your role in Kickstarter.
Sure. Well, in 2012, the games community was really starting to adopt Kickstarter. It's a really good tool for underserved communities to use to gather together to complete that cycle, right? Of like, hey, we're talking about it, we're creating it. Is anyone interested in buying it? Right. And so Kickstarter allows for a very speculative version of that. Like you can, for very low cost, you can ask that question and then see who comes and joins you. So it has the secondary effect then of taking the people that do come and want to throw money at your game, of recycling them not just into your games but into other people's games as well. And so it creates all of these interlocking triangles of communities, overlapping communities that are interested in the same thing. And so role-playing games, as you pointed out, we're going through this nadir in terms of like retail opportunities and publishing opportunities. Like no publisher wanted to hear from a role-playing game designer in 2010. Oh my God, no. I mean, they still hardly want it, but the fact that it happens at all today is just mind-blowing to me. Anyway, so it allowed people like Joshua Newman was early to the platform with one, I think his follow-up to Shock. And so it allowed them to head over there and to see if there was an audience for what they were doing. And if that audience not just wanted to support them, but actually wanted to put money down to make these games. So anyway, but that was happening in indie video games at the time on Kickstarter, in addition to tabletop miniatures games, in addition to role-playing games. It was really starting to heat up. And so Kickstarter was looking for someone to explain it all to them and to make sense of it. And I just was in the right place at the right time. I managed to get in touch with their head of community, and I was designing games. I was speaking at PAX. I was out there in the community at the time, talking about games. I was helping people make games. We give talks about, how to make games and whatnot. And so, yeah, in the fall of 2012, they hired me as their first category specialist. They hired me as a game specialist. And so I started basically entry level, learning the platform, how a tech company works, how the Kickstarter in specific worked, and then learning about all the parts of the game community that I didn't have contact with. And it was just a good place for me. It was kind of a summary of the past 10 years of my work of helping people. As soon as I figured out how to make a game, within the next year, I was on panels at Icon or whatever, giving people advice on how to take the steps that I had already taken. And, I never stopped doing that. And so Kickstarter was a way for me to do that at scale, was to help people, move forward and create these games or creative projects or hobbies or businesses or careers, all these things I got to, work with people on. It was wonderful. So yeah. And then the games community, appreciated having someone inside who spoke their language. And I think I just acted as an interpreter. I kind of held the door open, made sure that Kickstarter didn't slam the door in the games community's face. One of the most significant things that Kickstarter did, this touches on something we mentioned earlier about this kind of games as art idea, is that when they divided the creative projects of the site into categories, they included games. They included games next to film, music, art, dance, all these things. And that's a very significant gesture. It's still to this day, but in 2009, when they made this decision, or maybe it was 2010, that was still a debate about the creative validity of games. And the games community was obviously trying to justify itself, saying look at the beautiful things that we're creating. But for a tech company to come along and just say oh, it's self-evident. Of course, games are valid creative projects.
Nowadays, I guess it's easier to make the argument when I guess video games are just the biggest industry, I think, in terms of entertainment and money. So yeah, but 2009, yeah.
It hadn't sunk in yet. Video games had eclipsed film at that point, but it hadn't sunk into everyone what that meant. And so, Kickstarter was a cultural force at the time, and so for them to just say no, this is how it is, was very significant. But for me personally, as I said, I love role-playing games, and I think that they are underserved, or especially in 2012. One of the first things I did at Kickstarter was started tracking role-playing games and their success on the platform, and how much money they raised, how many backers, how successful were they compared to other games projects. And I personally tracked that data for years. And I enlisted the aid of my boss to help out to get some tracking internally. The data team, I would go and bother them, but it was me manually tagging these projects. Eventually, years later, I got an intern who I sat down for 3 months one summer and be okay, you got to help me document. We got to get some more data on these role-playing game projects. And my research showed that there was a very powerful, though small, relatively small community that was supporting these role-playing games, but their size was their size didn't represent their impact, right? Even though it was a small group of backers compared to design and tech or even big video game projects, they were still able to get funded tons of these small to medium-sized, very high-quality games projects. And eventually, though, you start to see that translate into the success of Fate, into Numenera, and then into Seventh Sea, which was, each of these was the biggest RPG of its type at the time. Right, Dungeon World was probably the first biggest out of the gate, though wasn't the first role-playing game project on the platform. And then, this culminates in the madness around Avatar, where Mark Diaz Truman, who ran the Seventh Sea project with John Wick, started his own company after that, and understood the dynamics of what was going on, and went out and got that Avatar license and brought it to Kickstarter, and then raised $10 million for a role-playing game. And this was inconceivable. I cannot stress, this is inconceivable. In 2012, when I started, the idea that a role-playing game could raise $10 million on the platform was not on anyone's radar. And honestly, not even mine, really. But I did understand the potential, and I did understand the power that this small community could have, and that it was worth dedicating time to them, even though that in 2012, 2013, 2014, they weren't delivering big dollars, but they were growing, and they were successful, and they were increasing the quality of the projects. Like, the fans and creators were both in this virtuous cycle of increasing quality. And
the Polish tabletop renaissance kind of began with, I guess, 2018 with Wspieram To, which is a Polish knockoff of Kickstarter, basically. And again, the publisher Black Monk decided to publish the 7th edition of Call of Cthulhu, like a well-beloved game in Polish fandom. And like, they were not sure whether they will get the money. They made a very modest estimate of the amount of money they would need to like barely publish Call of Cthulhu. And they got like, 20 times the required amount or something. It was crazy. I don't remember the exact numbers, but it just blew over. And like, officially, the tabletop RPGs were back in like publishing wise. It was on. So, are you planning to release any new games?
Oh, yeah. I'm planning on it, but can I do it is the thing. I actually am on a moratorium right now. I've forbidden myself from releasing any new games or game books.
What?
Yeah. I just need to like clean up my company and my life a little bit. But like I did Torchbearer 2nd edition, which was 4 books, and then all these other materials around them. And then to take a break, this is like, I don't know what is wrong with me, but in order to cool down from Torchbearer, I did Miseries. And Miseries is 6 books. Originally, I guess it would have been 4 books, but I split the first book up into 3. So,
are all of those books required to play?
No,
okay.
And neither are all of the books required to play for Torchbearer. I mean, you just need 2, really.
Okay.
But what I found is that we spin off all these additional ideas, and when we're designing these games, and I can put them to the side and try to come back to them a few years later. But it's actually a lot easier to design them and get them out if I do it all at once. And so it's almost like we did too much for Torchbearer, because and same thing for Miseries. Like, it's just, because it's not like, 1 supplement a year. It's like, no, here's the whole game. Go figure it out, and we'll talk to you later.
Did it work? Sells numbers?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. No, never. Nothing we do works, though. Like, our games sell very little. Like, yeah. So, we keep trying different things. Anyway, so I did like 10 books in, I don't know, like 4 years or something. It's a lot. And the last Miseries book, well, I guess the last 2 in particular, I guess, were just very, very research intensive. Like, I probably could have written like 4 just like random sci-fi and fantasy games in the time it took me to fucking do those books, because doing a game with like historical details just requires a level of rigor that a standard fantasy game does not. You can just fucking make shit up. Like, even if I'm trying to like base it on Tolkien stuff, you can just make shit up. But you know, it took me I don't know, a year or a year and a half to find out where the Prince de Condé was in 1647 and 1648. Like, I had to, because I realized that he is the through line character, that like that he's not the, I guess if I were writing a novel, I would probably, I wouldn't use him, but I would use a character in his entourage to follow him around through his exploits, because he kind of crosses over from one age to the other, right? Of this, like the Ancien Regime, the nobles and their like war making ability, and then he becomes entangled in court politics, and he runs afoul of Mazarin, and then joins a revolt. He eventually ends up fighting against his own crown. He's a hero. They throw 2 Te Deum masses for this guy, and then like 3 or 4 years later, he's on the side of the Spanish fighting his old like sub commander, in the Netherlands. And so he's just this great perspective character, and so I wanted the campaign to follow him as well, and so I needed to find out, like, if it was possible, where was he in 1648, where was he in 1647, and I found it. I fucking found the journal of his second in command, Gramont, and he talks about where they were. I still don't know exactly the date that he gets summoned back to Paris. He's in Barcelona, and he's been exiled at that point, because not because he's done anything wrong per se. He's a complete asshole who would publicly abuse his wife. He's like also a classic. Like he's a character out of fiction. Like because he's in his 20s, he's wealthier than fucking God. He's won all these incredible victories. He's publicly verbally abusive to his wife. And so he's banished to Catalonia by Anne and Mazarin in order to cool him out, right? In order to like dim his star, because they were afraid he was just going to take over. But they need him. The Archduke Leopold Wilhelm is prowling around in 1648, threatening Paris. He's just like 80 miles away with his army. And the Parisians have in their living memory the experience of having Paris invaded and sacked. Henry the Fourth did it. Their king, Henry of Navarre. Anyway, so like there's a real fear of Paris being taken. So anyway, so they summon the young, hot-headed general back to Paris from his station in Catalonia, where he loses his first battle. Their plan works. He is undefeated at that point until he goes to Catalonia, and then he faces the Spanish fortress of Lerida, and can't crack it. And so that's where we pick up the story, is him coming home from the failed siege of Lerida. And so, but it took me years of research to figure all that out.
Have you tried using ChatGPT or other chatbots recently for research?
No, they don't know anything.
But they are pretty good at historical context. I'm not sure how would they fare with like specific person that has few written sources about them. But I did research for one campaign using ChatGPT. It was like, okay, what was London like in March of 1943? And ChatGPT is just very good at, there was this operation just being prepared. On the radio, you could hear those announcements, blah, 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 and so on. So this person was here, this person was here. So for this specific, it seems pretty good.
I'm working on an AI project, and those bots are not very smart. And but you're right. Historical detail is a little bit better because there's a lot of sources for it out there,
Mm.
but they haven't really been trained on history. Um, right? It's not like they've been given the Encyclopedia Britannica, or they've been given like
Yeah.
all of Google Books or Project Gutenberg to read. Um, they've been trained on trash. So for me,
Yeah.
um, I would need to check all the facts that they produced anyway. Whatever it
Hmm.
said, I would have to source it and find it just to make sure, because it could be wrong. And also, like, a lot of the sources about Mazarin and Anne are for France in 1648 are extremely biased. They're
Mm.
like especially about Anne, like the qualities of a woman ruler, written about, from the 1700s through the 1900s. Man, those historian dudes are just really fucking sexist. So so you just have to be really careful, with the sources.
I would like to ask you for a little bit of context because, okay, you mentioned the research,
Hmm.
but it's for a game, right? Because that's
Yeah.
okay. So
Hmm.
what game is it? Because that's the
Sure,
one you
sure.
mentioned before, right?
So um in 2015, I became obsessed with this idea of doing a doing the game that like Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson would have done if they didn't do a fantasy game, right? If they
Hmm.
decided to make a historical role playing game, and because I played, in researching Torchbearer, I played a ton of basic D&D, and I mean I played a lot of AD&D too, but we dredged up those books and we like replayed by the rules. And I in playing them, and that I realized that the combat that they build is really from pike and shot war games, maybe a little Napoleonics, but more pike and shot, because you have this idea of rank. And you have like second ranks that like fold their spears down, over the first rank and like poke out from there. That's very
Hmm.
much 17th century warfare. And also the idea of like warfare as a grid, and, your units are moving in this grid form, and whatnot. So that
Also apparently, that was all the rage during war games back in those days. Like they weren't focused about for like modern wars. No,
right,
it was Napoleonic era all the way.
right, Napoleonic and before, yeah, they love
Yep.
Napoleonic stuff. They love the ship combat for Napoleonic stuff, but they also did the earlier 17th century stuff. Anyway, I just saw
Mhm.
these bones in there, and I thought it would be cool. Like, okay, well, what if we made like a musketeer class for basic D&D? What if we did um, a necromancer class, like a real necromancer for or a real Jesuit? That Jesuit was my favorite, because you
A
could by 10.
musketeer, a necromancer, and a Jesuit.
Yes, yeah, right. It's the beginning of a great novel. Um,
Yeah, or a
and
joke, or a RPG campaign. Yeah.
yeah, right. All of the above.
Mhm.
Uh, so I did a little like pamphlet zine uh, with uh, with those classes in there: street urchin, the philo thief. I did a little bit of research and put them in, and then I the other thing that I found when I was doing that in the research was I needed some art, and I was like, oh wait, I bet all this art is free, right? This is the stuff from the 17th century. There's no copyright,
Hmm.
and I found these a series of etchings, um, les misères et malheureux de la guerre, or something like that. Forgive my French pronunciation. The Miseries and Misfortunes of War. Um,
Hmm.
and by this guy Jacques Caillot or Callot, uh, in the 1630s, and they're just it's an anti-war pamphlet from the 1630s, but it's really lurid. It's showing all the horrible things that soldiers do to the citizens, and then their own people. Like the battle, the scene is just very brief, but it shows all these all the pillage and rape and all these horrible things, and desertion, robbery, banditry, and then it shows the soldiers getting hanged for their crimes, and then it shows the soldiers' generals getting rewarded by the king. It's like 18 plates. It's incredible. Really.
Also, nothing has changed.
Right. Yeah. Incredible for that alone is that it's still relevant. And so that became the title of the game, from the Miseries et Misfortunes, right? The Miseries and Misfortunes. I mean, it also perfect. It falls into the D&D style framework of naming, right? Where you want the same consonant at the top. It's all very provocative. And then, I could use that art for free. But what I discovered is that the D&D style classes for the Musketeer, the Jesuit, and the Necromancer and whatnot, they don't really work. They're fun to have this idea that you could go from, an initiate brother to father general of the Jesuits. But it doesn't make sense that a Jesuit is getting 1d4 hit points every level. And it doesn't make sense the Jesuit needs 32,000 experience points or whatever to get from there to there. Because in basic D&D, experience points are earned primarily through gathering loot. And so if a Jesuit with 32,000 livres is one, rich, two, going against the precepts of the order. So and the same thing, a musketeer that has all that money, from leveling up, would just retire. The whole point of Dumas's run with the the D'Artagnan romances is that guy is always scrambling for money and office and all these things. He's the end of 20 years after is this giant grift. It's incredible. All the political intrigue and action, whatever. And then he's but it's going to cost you.
I think the Conan game did it right. The new one, the 2D20 game. It's between the adventures, you just spent all your money. Every single adventure, you're broke again because you just spend it on drink and partying.
Oh, yeah, perfect. Yeah. We tried to build that into Torchbearer 2. We tried with a little more of a punishing system, where that basically society is wringing the money out of you, so you resent them and then you leave. So anyway, so it just didn't really make sense. It was a funny joke to do as a zine, and you can play the first level of it and have a good time, but it doesn't really work beyond that. So it just stuck in my head, and I just really started from those Callot illustrations and Dumas. Those are the two pulls, and then started doing more and more research. And I released, I think in 2019, a revised version that was much more historical, and then had the bones of basic D&D. You roll D20 in combat, you roll funny dice for skill checks and whatnot. But I added modern systems to it, skills, advancement that is not experience point based. It's narrative, objective based, a reputation system, a resources system, life paths for the characters rather than character classes. So you can You can be a necromancer and a Jesuit and a musketeer, all like at different points in your life.
Okay.
And so then, as I was doing that game, like I thought I could punch that all into a 200-page book, but that was not true. And so after a couple years, after doing Torchbearer, I went back to that and I broke that first book up into like the system book, the character creation book, and then the book for Magic. And then I added 3 more books on top of that. Then the 4th book is really the book that tells you how to run the game. It tells you like how to prepare for a session, how to build a plot, like how to use history in the game. But it starts creating that I needed to write that book to prepare for books 4 and 5, because like teaching people how to use history, like how to create an RPG narrative around history is challenging. I mean, a lot of people have tried it, and I took my best shot. And so books 5 and 6 use that structure, like we call it the moment structure, and I break down these like historical moments for you, and like moment by moment, step by step, event by event, and point out like where the characters appear and then what opportunities the characters have to act in the umbrella of history or to change the course of history. And then so book 5 is an example adventure where you try to you run an errand for the Prince de Condé from Barcelona up into Andorra, and then across the mountains and try to get back to Paris. But yeah, you have to deliver 2 messages. One to the governor of Lerida, the fortress that he failed to siege, and one to the Bishop Duran in Andorra. So, and then of course nothing goes as planned, and it's a good time.
I see.
But so that's a very specific, like, more like traditional RPG adventure. But the Paris book is kind of what I realized from the beginning. After the zine, I realized that I was going to have to create a lot more historical context if people were going to play in this world. People don't know a lot about Paris, the history of Paris in general, and they don't know a lot about the year 1648. That's all fine. Like, that's not a criticism. It's just that I needed to do work as a game designer. And so I needed to kind of write a source book for that. But I mean, I went a little crazy as I do. I go a little obsessive, like in Burning Wheel, you can see it in the life paths. But in this book, you can see that, I give nearly like 1 event per day from the 1st of January 1648 to like the end of August 1648, and they're all historical.
Okay, that's pretty cool, because history is one of the hardest settings to run. Just approach. Mateusz, my friend from the channel, I think hates running history. And the argument is, it's the worst lore problem you can have. It's hard for me to run games in the Star Wars universe, because for every day, if you go anywhere near the movies, there's like established lore, what characters did, what happened on which planet. You have to do a ton of research. History is this bit times 10.
Yeah, it's tough. But it's so like the world of 1648 is so much a fantasy game. Is so there's there like all of this idea of like, intrigue and assassination and bribes and wars, and power struggles, like all these things that we love in like Game of Thrones or whatever. It's happening in that year. So I wanted to see if I could do it. And so it's not enough for me to just give you the timeline of history, right? Like that's not going to work. And so I have to give you the dates, and then I have to kind of give you the context around what's happening, who's involved, and all that stuff. But then even more, I go like a level deeper and spell out the opportunities for the players and say, okay, so if you're in this faction, your opportunity here is to elevate your status in the faction. Like you can make a good show and show that you're a loyal member of this faction. If you're in this other faction, this is your chance to knock that faction down. And you can do that by, you know, bribing this guy or trying this or you know, something along those lines. So, right. I want to provide like, you know, because history is so hard, like the standards are much higher. Like I mean, I go a lot deeper than I would in any of my other stuff. Like if you look at the Torchbearer adventures that we did, or even the Burning Wheel adventures we did, like I don't go as deep as I did in this. Yeah, but I try not to write the adventure for you. That's the key, is like the book 5 is an example adventure, but book 6 is a kind of like a structure that like on which are hanging many adventures that you can pick from. And then, you know, hopefully I've given you the tools though, that when you dive in, it's just obvious, like what happens, that you're going to challenge this guy to a duel on the street, or you're going to, you know, spread a rumor about this other guy. So right. But to go further than that, like I had to, so it's not just about the historical events, but I had to create a system of the effects of your actions, or the actions of the powerful patrons and whatnot. So you have these moments in the game where, or in history, like that. I'll give an example. During the riots, spoiler, there are riots, and it's very close to a revolt. In August of 1648 in Paris, the Marshal de Mireille, the guy's name is so hard to pronounce. He's this old bastard dude. Who was basically summoned to the capital by Anne because he's a hard ass, and he replaces the previous Minister of Finance, Demery. Demery was a snake, but this guy's a hard ass. And so his actions within about a month, maybe 6 weeks, cause a revolt, right? Start riots in the streets and everything. Anyway, he finds himself, I believe, on the Quai d'Orange, alone in the midst of the riots. Like this moment, like, you know, this very cinematic moment, like the crowds swirl past and, you know, disappear into the streets and across the bridge, and he's on his horse and he's alone, and this guy just kind of steps out from an alley or maybe up the stairs from the quay, and he I believe he's a silversmith, and he's got a pistol, and he fucking points the pistol at this Marshal of France, the Minister of Finance, and pulls the trigger, and the pistol misfires. And dude shits his pants and fucking runs back to the Palais Royal, and alive, and goes back and, you know, tells the queen, you know, that shit is bad. Like, and he's just like, you know, he's like, we got to do something. Like he for that moment, he is a broken man. So I have arranged it. I have built this entire ridiculous machine, this Rube Goldberg machine, so that you can be that silversmith or someone similar on the quay with him. And you'll know at that moment that if you assassinate the Marshal Millet, that you will change the course of history, and that Paris will descend into chaos. And not because the game master says that Paris will descend into chaos, but because I've created a meter of the mood of the people of Paris. And at that point, the mood of the people of Paris is teetering on revolt, right? It's so low that they are right there. And so if you're at the table, the game master and the players are going to be going, no, don't do it. Or I'm sure someone is going to be saying, do it. You'll know in that moment that if you pull the trigger and you do the deed, you will tip the scales of history, and then things are going to get rococo.
So let me use that as a segue, because this sounds like an OSR module. I don't know how familiar are you with the OSR movement?
Yeah, I am fairly familiar with it.
Yeah, because again, sounds like, a lot of OSR games take their inspirations from the early editions of D&D, and then there's the idea of specific module-based mechanics, like so based on what the players do, having a role that determines in this specific game, like has a specific ruling on, the revolt is happening, or the city council orders a random NPC to be burned as a witch, and that influences the story, and so on and so on. So that sounds like an OSR. So could you maybe tell us, first of all, do you agree with it? Like, would you say this is an OSR-inspired or similar game? And in general, what do you think about OSR games?
I do. It was like, I think this particular design comes from a similar impulse to reinvestigate the early roots of the hobby, the medium. And like I said, my inspiration was just to imagine, like, what if they had designed a historical game instead for a role-playing game. And I can tell you that the OSR people have come out and said that the game is not OSR. It's been reviewed multiple times, and so it seems that rather than I don't know, like that means, like, I don't know what OSR is then. If this is,
I guess maybe I'm guessing here the arguments, but OSR games should be other OSR systems compatible, so that you would create a module maybe instead of a game, and that module could be played with whatever OSR game is there, or even basic D&D.
Yeah, I think there's too much agency in my games. I think the players have too much control, too much agency to kind of live the lives of their characters. The role of the GM is constrained through a variety of systems and rules. Like, the GM doesn't get to decide what happens. The GM can't overrule, has no power to overrule any rule in any of my games. And so in Miseries is no exception. So, and I think that OSR, like, is no longer really about even a particular type of game or reference to D&D from 74 or whatever. I think it's just it's an identity that people adopt. So yeah, and once an identity is adoptable, that means that you can tell people that they're not punk enough, or they're not playing it right. So
you could try to define OSR, even to the disagreement of some OSR people. There's always going to be someone who's like, yeah, this is not true OSR.
Right. That's exactly it. Is like, you can keep leapfrogging backwards and say, you're not OSR enough. You don't know the true OSR.
Yeah, and at some points you're having the academic discussions, which may be true, but are not accepted by the wider community. So that's the case in the video games industry with the RPG genre. Like, what is an RPG game in video games? It's nowadays, like, half of games are RPG games by standards of 20 years ago. Because at this point, if you have character development in the game, it's an RPG.
Yeah, well, RPGs are very popular.
But if you would go very specific, I would argue Crusader Kings 3 is one of the best RPGs out there.
Wow. Sure. But do you play multiple characters?
You can totally play multiple characters, and they actually have role-play mechanisms in the game. So, for example, there's this resource, you can get stress. If stressful things happen to you, you get stress. And if you act against the traits your character has, you get stress. So, for example, if your character is cruel, if you pass up on the opportunity to torture someone, you will get stress.
Oh yeah, there you
So
go.
it's a roleplay mechanic, and the game makes you roleplay the character you have, and there's a lot of characters, Crusader Kings, and then you have to roleplay because the game, you don't just play one character, you play a house, and your character will die, and you will play your heirs, and they might have different traits, so you'll have to roleplay them differently. So I'd say like totally a role-playing game. And at this point, Diablo 4, is it a role-playing game? Like, what role do you really play? Like, how do you click monsters and kill them? It's, if Diablo 4 is a role-playing game, everything is a role-playing game. I would argue. So
Well, yeah, at a certain point, the idea of leveling or character progression became the definition of role playing game, and at least in digital games, and I don't agree with that.
Yeah, so maybe OSR might have a similar issue, although what genre doesn't have?
Sure.
I know maybe people would agree on what a horror is, maybe, but other than that, I don't know. Okay, so OSR, your game. So, speaking of interpretations of games, what do you think about the Hot Circle project? Which, as far as I know, is a fan project that simplifies the Burning Wheel.
Yeah. I love it when people make games based on or inspired by my games. I think it's super cool. My games are inspired by other people's games, right? My games are a response to them, reaction, and commentary on them. And so I'm really flattered that folks have taken time, with the Gold Hack or with Hot Circle, and then they've tried to remake it in their mold. I think that's super cool. I think that's the way it should be done.
But you've also been known for discouraging people to modify from modifying the rules, from creating house rules. So how do those two things combine?
No, I discourage people from reading the book saying, I don't like this doesn't seem like it works, and then turning to me and saying, how do I fix this? And I say, play the game. Why don't you play the game? And they get upset at me, and then I get this reputation for discouraging house rules, which is just not true. I have I have one, like Torchbearer has an entire license that you can use to build your own house rules and whatnot. For Burning Wheel, I never built out a license for it. Though I mean, I love it when people turn in monsters or life paths or, but honestly, the fixes that people turn in, the quote unquote fixes that people turn in for Burning Wheel, just are not very well considered. They just don't take into account the currency cycle of the game, and how if you remove conflicts, it just fucks up everything. The rate of advancement, the rate of earning rewards and spending rewards, the consequences of your actions. So they're like the wound load that a character might be taking. It's just it's very complicated. It's a stupidly complicated game. I'm sorry. So what I see is people jumping in with a first impression. They say that this doesn't work and they want to fix it or simplify it or whatever. And then I say, well, we did that in Mouse Guard, or we tried that in Torchbearer, or that's been tried before and that doesn't work. Yeah. And I get this reputation as being an ogre. And then, and if you want to pull in stuff from Fate or other games into Burning Wheel, that's super cool. But now it's a different game. Fate, Fate style compels. And I've thought about those. It's a super, super cool rule. It just doesn't work in Burning Wheel. If you are playing the game as it is intended and as it is written, with and the way beliefs work and the way the game master's role works in regard to beliefs, the way rewards work and setting obstacles and advancement, all these things, then those, like the Apocalypse World style stuff, the Fate style stuff, it just doesn't work in the context of the system. Burning Wheel has its own view of the world and its own view of the consequences of your actions and you know, and how difficulty will be created for you as a player. So like it becomes, it's fine. I'm not saying don't do it. It's just, don't call it Burning Wheel. Like it's just, it's now you've created another game, and that's great. That game may end up being better than Fate and Burning Wheel combined. Like, go for it. But I can't call it Burning Wheel.
Yeah, the Burning Wheel might be, in many ways, maybe the quintessential example of rules as written philosophy, which I know has some followers in Poland for sure. I've met people who were so strong rules as written followers that they would argue that John Harper doesn't run Blades in the Dark the correct way.
I'm in their camp.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, John.
The argument was, we were arguing about Blades in the Dark and how you should run them, and some people would point, okay, but look at the games that John Harper has published himself on his own channel when he runs it, and like, so we take this as a significant information on how we should interpret Blades in the Dark. And those people would be like, no, just John Harper doesn't run his system good.
This is John's not unique. So many game designers, like you know, the WotC game designers, they just toss the rules out and run it according to their personality. That's
another issue.
The streamers. Go ahead.
Personally, I believed, and again, this is again a question for you for the Burning Wheel. Like, what was it like in early 2000s? Because I feel like the general principle was to buy a tabletop RPG book, read it, ignore half of it because you don't like it, and run the game anyway in the same model as everyone else. So like, you as the game master just decide things on the fly, for better or for worse. I think usually for the worse. There was just the general disappointment with role-playing games. Like, the just model wasn't a working model wasn't really there. What worked maybe were linear scenarios, but people were just getting fed up with them because they, in many ways, they're the same, all of them. So I saw the Burning Wheel as a statement against this culture. Like, yeah, if a game is well designed, just play the game, because otherwise you'll just continue to run into the same problems over and over, and you will play shitty games.
Yeah, it's complicated and nuanced. And this discussion did not start in the early 2000s. This discussion started in 1975, or maybe even 1974. And you can read about the debates like that were even more heated than the stuff that's been going on in the last 20 years in my friend John Peterson's book, Elusive Shift, where he talks about the first 10 years of the conversation around role-playing games. And this idea of, like, you know, that the game is in the play at the table versus the game is the rules is written, like that. This debate has existed forever. But for me, I approach my games as game design. And I mean, I don't know if I adequately articulated this in the first version of Burning Wheel, and the game's kind of a mess. But very quickly, I realized that if we were going to be able to create consistent results, a shared experience, and I was going to be able to improve as a game designer, I had to treat these texts as game design, as designs, right? Where you and I are both held to the same standard when we interact with the design, so that then we can try to see, when you try to operate the design and I try to operate the design, here are the outputs that we get. And therefore, okay, this seems to be working. This doesn't seem to be working. let's improve, let's ditch this or do more of this, whatever. So that's right. That's my particular philosophy. And you can see that, like, in role-playing game design tech, some problems are really, really hard to solve. And designers have just kind of abandoned a design solution to them for I don't know, most of the history of game design. But uncertainty, like, for example, the uncertainty engine in, like, the game is cruel. This is a horror show of misfortune, this die. And so it, like, they would begin to create narrative, or the appearance, the illusion of narrative, right? We had a series of events that strung together, and this, the uncertainty generator produced these wonderful results that have made it seem like there was some rising action toward a goal. And then when you achieve the goal, or to achieve the goal, we roll the die one more time, and the die says no. The die says, in fact, you fail catastrophically, and all of your efforts are for naught, and your character's dead, or blah, blah, blah. So in those moments, the players at the table, and even some of the designers, rebelled. They said, no, we can't let this stupid uncertainty generator ruin our fun. We'll ignore it. Okay, great. It's an understandable response. Like, it's a perfectly understandable response at the table. For me, as a designer, I looked at that and saying, like, okay, well, what's wrong with the game design? Why did the game design take you on this journey? Like, was that intended? First of all, like, is it intended that you're just completely beholden to luck? And if so, then we need to let people know at the beginning that you don't know where this is going to go, because this thing sucks and it's just going to betray you at the last moment. So if that's the case, then we just need to frame the context of the game a little differently. If it's not intended, if at that moment of climax, or that critical juncture, there's meant to be the possibility of a different result, or that the players or the game master is meant to have some greater influence on outcome of events than the roll of a die, then it needs to be in the game design. The game needs to say that the game can provide tools for the players and the game masters to mitigate the uncertainty mechanism that's in front of them. And that's when you get fate points, or luck points, and all these things start emerging. I think, like, it's James Bond or Top Secret, like those games. Like, once you start trying to put the spy genre into a role-playing game, then the percentile generator for uncertainty immediately destroys the illusion. You're like, whoa. I'm fucking James Bond. Like, what do you mean I fail and crash the car and die in a fiery wreck? Like, what? No.
Yeah.
Like, the movie just started. This is the opening chase scene. I can't, it's just not possible. So that's when, designers started to understand that there needed to be mitigation systems. There need to be those other things.
Because I guess also there was a mismatch between there are rules in James Bond movies, and they're unspoken, but they're pretty strict. Like, important characters don't die before the end of second act, for example. Yeah. That's a rule. And if you were making a role-playing game that should consistently give you James Bond movies, the rule has to be there somehow.
Exactly.
You can at most get kidnapped or wounded before it's appropriate in the plot to do so. And I guess this mismatch of expectations and what the games give you, I think the most common thing which baffles me as a game designer is the expectation of many players that the game master should cheat in a Dungeons and Dragons game during combat.
Right.
That this is the default way to play. Game master should cheat when it just wouldn't feel good to kill the players because of bad luck. So why the fuck is the bad luck like a part of a game system?
Exactly. Why? Right. Then why do you have bad luck? It's not the game master's fault. It's not the player's fault. It's the bad luck's fault. Why do you have fucking bad luck?
Yeah, like if you
Absolutely.
don't want it, like either have it and use it or not have it. I think a culture I would call story games is the best at it of incorporating a conscious design of if the game isn't about death, I don't know, Brindlewood Bay, I don't think the characters can die because or just not easily, not in the opening act because you have bad luck on investigation. You just can't, and that's it. It's just consciously in the design, or just
Right.
reinforcing the genre in general is pretty well done in those games. Although sometimes you can argue it's done too strictly.
Sure.
Like you start to lose stakes, maybe because, like, of course, nothing bad will happen because.
Right. Right. And that's just a matter of now investigating the outcomes of that particular design. Like if we're having a scene structure, we have plot immunity, or if we just take death or misfortune off the table, then how do we continue to create excitement? How do we move things forward? At the table. How do we get the players invested in what's happening? All these things, like again, they become the next set of game design questions. They're not fail states. It's just further questions.
Yeah, and then you also have OSR, which in general is on the other spectrum of, you can totally die in the first scene if you have bad rolls, and that's it. That's part of a game. Just create another character.
Sure, but OSR also believes in the primacy of play at the table. Excuse me, being more important than the text.
It's rulings, not rules.
Yeah, and that the game master has this complete authority. I mean, that's fine. It's
Although it feels like that if the game master, there's this culture of rulings. So it's the same as ancient Rome. There was this idea, the office of a dictator was present in the Roman law. And he had all the power, but there were cultural pressures on the dictator to not abuse the power.
Yeah,
I think OSR is in many ways tries to have a similar approach. Like those games give all the power to the game master, but he shouldn't use the power. And it's not that any decision he does is a good decision. Like, for example, if you don't respect the brutality of randomness, stakes, and death being a real threat, I could argue that you're not playing, with coherently with the spirit of the game, even if the game gives you all the power.
Yeah, I am deeply suspicious of unmitigated power dynamics among people, and they're just it's not my favorite thing. But what I saw when we were especially playing this game later as fully conscious adults who had designed a bunch of games and like were really investigating the design was that the game is actually pretty well balanced. Basic D&D in particular, it's a very highly refined design. It's harsh, and it doesn't necessarily produce the heroic narrative that it hints at on the tin, at least not straight away, because bad rolls are going to murder your characters to start. But it, if played in a meta sense, which is part of OSR, which is interesting, but played with this idea that your next character is essentially going to benefit from the meta experience of your previous character, that if you're playing the Caves of Chaos and Keep of the Borderlands, your first character dies, you bring in your second character, you're a lot smarter. That character, no matter what you do, is a lot smarter, a lot more survivable.
I think I've heard the name avatarism or something. That for sure the game is played by the player, not the character. The conscious, like, it's a design principle.
Yeah, and I think that is unconsciously present in the basic D&D like style of play. But what the unmitigated power dynamic stuff does, in my observation, is that it undermines that avatarism. It undermines the successes of the players when they do learn and they do overcome these very difficult challenges. That if the game master can always just wave hand, fudge dice, and just say you overcome, then the accomplishments of the players are diminished, and now the story is about when the players have done enough to please the game master that they say, okay, you may pass.
Yeah.
And so you're playing to this person rather than playing to this game. And that's just not the way I like to play. I love games with game masters, like Dungeon Masters, Game Masters, referees, judges, all these things. I like this asymmetric style role-playing game where one player is negotiating one set of authorities and the other players are negotiating a different set of authorities. Like I think that's actually a very productive way to play. I think it creates tension. It creates a nice like movement of factors between the two sides. But having it be completely unmitigated and where you're playing to the whims of the other side, like that's a very particular type of game that I can only play for an hour or so, when I'm in Denmark.
Okay. I've learned to respect OSR. I didn't think I would years ago. I used to laugh at people who played Tunnels and Trolls at modern day conventions. But then I learned to respect the insistence of culture of game mastering. Although I feel like OSR games, they benefit a lot from the principles created in story games, like all of your Fates, and especially maybe powered by the Apocalypse games with your collaborative storytelling and just more. I think those games are way better at ruling by consensus, so deciding the fiction on whether the entire table agrees, on just gathering ideas from the table. So I guess you can be like the enlightened monarch during when you play, when you're game mastering, not this dictator of old that's gonna amuse the players and they better like it. But this game master who's way better at making calls that all the table agrees with, and also he's strict enough that it's not just bullshit, that's not just decided on a whim, but the stakes are real. I respect it. I don't know if this is my favorite way to run games and play games, but
yeah,
I get why it works.
The modern games are better at describing procedure, first of all.
Yes.
And they're better at distributing authority in that procedure. Like, what are the players responsible for? What's the game master responsible for? What is the group responsible for? What's the host responsible for? All these things, like, not just like the player is responsible for their character, the game master is responsible for the story. Like, there's so many more levels of authority in a role-playing game, and Vincent's games in particular are very good at distributing and that authority, making it explicit. But the other side of this, like the other point that Vincent's games and my games are very clear about is it's not the game master's role to entertain the players, and this is something that is kind of unspoken, but I don't know, maybe half spoken in the kind of OSR style games. Like, there's so much work for the game master, right? You've got to come up with these like puzzles and adventures, like geographic puzzles, magical puzzles, political puzzle, all these things, and present them to the players. And then you don't have it's so weird. This is lapse in authority. You don't actually have the authority to say, okay, smash cut here, you're in the dungeon, and here's what's going on. You have to hope the players buy your seeds or whatever and journey to your adventure. You hear so many stories about players that have just said, we can do anything we want. I don't want to go to the dungeon. Let's go in the forest. And the game master's like, fuck.
Okay. This might be just me and my friends. Maybe I'm not talking about the entire OSR scene, but just a couple of people I know that play OSR. But I would argue this is not real OSR. That what you're talking are for sure are disadvantages of the traditional style of play, where there are adventures and there is this adventure with cool characters and scenes and whatever, and the players have to bite the hook and just experience the adventure. Or maybe the classic, like the old, like not old school Renaissance, but just pure old school style of play, where there is this prepared dungeon. But OSR, I think, tries to address this issue by having a lot of random tables. So
Yep.
and actually OSR also realizes the play to find out principle. So the game master doesn't know what will happen during the game. You might create dungeons together, improvise them, roll the tables. So like, I think a totally valid style of play in OSR games would be to explore a dungeon and roll every single room at the table using random tables. And the game master is there to like facilitate the fiction, but it's the system that generates the fiction, and it's not really game master who planned all of this. And the consequence of this is that you can actually go anywhere you want, because there's wherever you go, we have tables to generate it. Or you have a module, so the game master buys a module and doesn't read it, just reads it as you play, as you go, and just serves more like a judge than the creator of content.
Yeah, I mean, that is a very sexy way to play, or it's a sexy idea that any way you turn, there's going to be a random table, but that means the game master is like heavily reliant on improvisation.
Yeah,
because the modern OSR tables are wonderful and they're very evocative, and I mean I've written a few myself, and they require the game master to be quick to pick up the thing that's generated by the table and get it in the game. It's exhausting. It's an exhausting way to play.
Yeah, for sure. I would say that like all GM centric games have an issue of like, you need a GM that's very good. Like that, I mean, very good by that I mean has a lot of experience, has a lot of skills, has a lot of wisdom, is good at improv, is good at describing, and so on, so on, so on. It's hard to get a new game master to run a OSR game. I think it's pretty intimidating. Although I don't know, we'll see. I have my girlfriend wants to run some games, and like she's never run games before, just played a couple, and instinctually she gravitates towards OSR, which I wouldn't expect, but we'll see how it goes. So we'll see. Although this might be the story games principles helping this a lot with there's, I think it's the idea of game master being evaluated by the players, and the game master being there to entertain the players is getting out of fashion, thankfully. Even in games where GM has a lot of power. Because that's in Poland, the 90s and early 2000s. Oh my God, there's nothing but this. The genius creator game masters writing their amazing adventures, and even like competitions for the Game Master of the Year award or something. Like everything is Game Master focused, or like was, thankfully, I would say.
Yeah. So, yeah, I just don't believe in the cult of the Game Master. I think it's like once you start ascribing these like magical qualities to this person, this role or whatever, that you have to be this special good thing, and that you need a good game master to play. I just don't think it's true. I think it's demonstrably false. I think thankfully the world is full of mediocre game masters, because if it were only up to the elite, then there would be very few role-playing games played. I think we all have a lot of fun playing role-playing games with each other, like even if we're bad at it. I think it's actually an incredibly resilient format, and I think part of it, because it's so conversation-based and it's so interpersonal, that we play to each other's level. We enjoy each other's company, we enjoy each other's contributions, and we learn as we go. I saw some of the players from my group take over and run a few sessions of D&D for our group, and it was a blast. The difference in quality between my game mastering and their game mastering was that I was willing to eat a lot more shit in order to present a more comprehensive or adventure to the players, whereas my friend was like I'm not doing all this work. Like, what? No, and she's like, this is bullshit, and that's bullshit. Like, what, but when in the moment of like, calling for die rolls and like giving consequences and describing things, she was great, right? Like flawless.
Mm-hmm.
But I've been trained on whatever 40 years of fucking bullshit. So that's the only real difference that I saw.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Overall, I'm happy with where the hobby is going and things we have learned. I wouldn't go back to late 90s and to go back to playing those games. There's improvement for sure. Okay. Do you know any? Okay, so the Burning Wheel.
Yeah.
Tell me if I'm correct. Is the game about inner conflict like first and foremost? So just conflict. No, belief-based conflict. Your beliefs. You have to fight for your beliefs, right? I think that's the quote.
It's about the consequences of fighting for what you believe. That's what the game is.
Mm-hmm. Do you know of any other games that fulfill the same, like they have the same goal, or just maybe the same thing happens when you play those games that you know of?
I assume you're not talking about Mouse Guard or Burning Empires or
yes, like games by other people. Yeah. Do all of your games have this, like, are based on this principle?
Freemarket has it. Miseries has it. Yeah. So
all of them.
Inheritance has it. So yes. Yeah. So Iron Sworn, I think, is a new one that apparently borrows technology from Burning Wheel and has more of like a checkpoint system moving toward your goals and advancing.
I've played a bit of Iron Sworn. Yeah, it has iron vows. It's not beliefs, it's vows. A thing that you will do instead of what you believe in, although those are related for sure. Yeah, but overall, yeah, if you swear a vow, that's what the game's gonna be about.
Right. And then, oh man, what's this dude? There's another guy that actually credits Burning Wheel as an influence. Oh man, and I'm embarrassed that now I can't think of his game. It'll come to me. But I mean, Blades, is influenced by Mouse Guard and Torchbearer. Though, it takes the idea of like the goal or the belief or instinct in a much softer direction. They're just, it's just guidelines for the player. They don't play into the reward cycle necessarily, though you can get an experience point for playing them.
This one, I remember this. I kind of modified Blades due to this. When I run a campaign, I made players write down their beliefs on the character sheet, because there is experience question for have you fought for your beliefs, but they aren't written down. So I made them write it down, kind of like based on the Burning Wheel philosophy.
Right.
And it worked.
I had a long talk with John about that, and he says that is the wrong way to play. That he says you're not supposed to write out your explicit beliefs. Yeah. That they're right. It's you're just supposed to decide. The group is supposed to decide with you if you earn that experience point.
I sort of get it, but also it was a pretty clear principle for me, like a guideline for me as a game master. Like, what conflicts should I run towards? What themes? What issues? Yeah, and you can argue it's very good, because I know I could guess wrong. I could guess wrongly, or that for me, if we decide those things too publicly when play, like if it's a part of a conversation with all the people, it kind of loses its magic, I feel like. Yeah, I would like to have this scene where I talk with my brother. Okay, let's run a scene where you talk with your brother. You talk with your brother. The magic isn't there. I feel like it has to be unspoken more, and this seems to be a good compromise. Write it down. I will go from there.
Yeah. Oh, that is not the way to play Burning Wheel either. Is like asking for scenes to fulfill your beliefs. Like saying, I track my brother down and buttonhole him or whatever, like describing the actions of your character, that's legit. As a player, like asking for a scene, that is like an emergency switch that you flip if like something has gone wrong. Like the game master, the game master should be framing things in such a way that is engaging with the player's beliefs and instincts, um, and right. And then if you say like, well, I want to have a scene with my brother, the game master can say, well, it doesn't fit right now. Like you're not guaranteed to get that. Because the game master may be saving the brother for later, or maybe focusing on the interaction of these two other beliefs or something like that. Yeah, it's the player's job to drive toward their beliefs in the scenes that are presented, or in the opportunities or presented, the setting that's presented. Yeah, I do not like this like kind of metagame play of like I'm just gonna kind of request these kind of narrative items and check them off. Because I agree, it's not it removes the magic. It is anti-magical.
But interesting, because before you said you don't like unregulated power dynamics, and also that you don't really like the powerful GMs, Rockstar GMs, GM's responsibility to entertain the players. But from what you're saying, I hear that you're in the middle of the road, because you could go further with, everyone can request scenes, like everyone is a game master in some sense. That everyone's responsible for running their own arcs and stories and plots, and it seems that you were in the middle of the road. Like no, like the game master should have more responsibility for this to have more of a magic, to like make so that the players don't have to be also the screenwriters of their own stories as well as the participants. Am I getting this correct?
Yeah. The game master is not unregulated in Burning Wheel. The game master has a defined role, and has defined responsibilities there, obligations to the players and to the session and to the rules and whatnot, and the same thing for the players. So yeah, the game master's role in Burning Wheel is to create antagonists or obstacles to the players' beliefs, because technically the players could be antagonists in Burning Wheel. But that's their job. And so they need to have certain room to maneuver when they have that job. They have to be able to surprise the players. They can't like revealing all of the information to the players in Burning Wheel, won't work. Neither will withholding all of the information and playing like behind a screen and with secret maps and navigating a secret space, whatever, that won't work either. Yes, so it's this different space. So middle of the road space, you want to call it, that's fine. I mean, I should get off the road because we've been run over so many times, but but yeah, we just always make sure to define what everyone's responsibilities and roles are, in the game. And it's usually a little different. It usually seems like Burning Wheel game master role seems like the unregulated role. It seems like they're gonna be grinding you down, pushing you, and throwing all these things at you. But it's not that. And the player's role seems like the almost story game-ish, like, you're going to focus entirely on what your character believes, and you're going to only do that thing. And that's not true either. You have to negotiate the tension between the players and their characters wanting one thing, and the game master and their characters and obstacles wanting these other things. And then that's where the action happens in Burning Wheel.
I know that many modern games, especially PBTA-based gauntlet-sourced games, have really like the principles for game master and players. It seems like a solid solution. So it's not a rule, not a procedure. It's not telling you exactly what the game master is going to do every scene, but you can always go back to the list of principles and evaluate whether you're running the game correctly and whether you're playing the game correctly. Like, are you adhering to the principles? Yeah,
it's cool. Like, it's good design from Vincent to incorporate that stuff. Yeah, like, as long as it's not the only thing, right? From under principles, there have to be procedures.
Yeah, you can say that this is a fault of some gauntlet games. That it's nothing but principles.
Right.
And it's just the genre principles, and there you go. Good luck.
Right.
Thankfully, the better ones have like one or two interesting game mechanics, so that there's something. Okay, last big question is the OGL question. Have you followed the, what was it like last year? The OGL debacle? The new OGL from Wizards and so on. Have you followed it? What do you think about it?
Yeah, I think it's silly. I think it's silly on all sides. And I'm not saying to any of you who are listening that your childhood spent playing role-playing games is silly. I just think that on the fan side, I think folks got very emotional and perhaps reacted more strongly than I understood why anyone would react like that. And it just on the corporate side from Wizards, like I even understand what they're doing, but it just seems so frivolous, so unnecessary, and so poorly thought out. An execution of this decision. So, yeah, just
do your games use OGL license?
No.
Okay. Because I know there was like some people argued that this changes nothing, that many games that used OGL license didn't really have to, doesn't matter. But then some games just used it just in case, because why not?
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, my games just, just don't use that.
Okay, didn't need it. Okay, so just
yeah. And honestly, like I personally think that, like we talked about this last time, right? Like the OGL is just this, it's a marketing tool in order to create dominance and primacy for D&D and Wizards of the Coast. And I don't want to be a part of that. And I want more diversity in the space. I want more designs. I don't want like one big, like generic cornflake design that we all eat and we're like, yeah, all right, tastes fine. Tastes like everything
and
else.
Apparently it adheres to all tastes.
Right.
Apparently.
Yeah. Right. It can do this. This tastes like everything. It can taste like anything. Like there, I know that the movie industry has only been remaking The Great Train Robbery for the last 120 years, right? Like I've seen The Great Train Robbery. I mean, I must have seen it like 1,000 times at this point. Right. D&D as a cultural force, I think it's fascinating. I think that these like macro movements, like cultural movements and whatnot are really fascinating. And I want to put stuff like that in my games. And, how does a character affect culture? Like, I think that's a great question to ask. But I mean, like Wizards is owned by Hasbro. Hasbro is an acquisitive corporation, right? They grow by acquiring, and they are acquisitive in the true nature of the word too. Like they only want to grow. They want to grow and provide value for their shareholders. They are not nice. They don't have emotions. In fact, they don't have they only have value for their shareholders, and then the actions that they take in to gain value for their shareholders. So they thought that this was a way to gain value for their shareholders, was to retract this license and modify, put out a new one. Think about that. And like they only support D&D because it provides value for their shareholders, not because it's creative, not because it's diverse or it's innovative or any of these things, but because it has been a sleeper of value generator. Like over the last 20 years, like the value of D&D in terms of like Hasbro shareholders has skyrocketed. Like it provides way more value now than it did 20 years ago.
Yeah, and they still said that it's under monetized, like, which might be true, but monetizing more isn't exactly what people want. The players.
People who do not play D&D, who do not care about the culture of D&D, are in the boardroom, in the executive room, in the boardroom, talking about the cultural value of D&D and how it can be exploited to extract more revenue from D&D. That is what is happening right now with D&D. No one's talking about making D&D a better game. Like, I mean, I'm sure...
there's probably a designer somewhere out there in Wizards of the Coast I'm sure Jeremy
wants you know, and Chris Perkins or whatever, maybe like I'm sure that they want to make D&D the best game it can be. So maybe that's a little unfair, but the pressures that are on top of them will completely outweigh any design considerations that they want to make. And so the more valuable D&D becomes, the greater these pressures become, and the less it is about this idea that it is D&D is something from your childhood that gave you pleasant memories or all these things. Like, they don't care. Like, they want you to keep buying product. You know, and ideally they want you to subscribe. That's what's going to happen, is you're going to have to subscribe to play D&D.
Yeah, like those people are playing D&D weekly, but they're not paying us weekly. They just bought books 3 years ago. Like, where's the money?
Yep, that's what's going to happen.
Do you think this might be the crumbling of the D&D empire? Is this the last days of Rome, that it will fall and other games will take its place, or not yet, or maybe not ever?
Yeah, the last days of Rome. Who do you blame? Do you blame the politicians or the barbarians? Right?
With Rome?
Yeah.
I'm of it's complicated, but I guess I would blame the culture. That just Rome was, in many ways, Rome became too wealthy for its own sake. It made the culture degenerate. Just the quality of politicians, the quality of people, the quality of state building, and in the end, you didn't have enough value in the society to support the infrastructure, the army, the politics. It's like culture in general, but like as factors, like both like barbarians, politics, economy, all of it. So like at the core, I would say the culture.
Well, okay, great. Let us carry the metaphor. The culture. Okay, so I would go further and say, similar to Polish Lithuania, that Rome was wealthy and powerful and failed to continue to extend rights and wealth to its constituents, to the people underneath it. This is how wealthy, like, democratic states grow, is that they generate wealth and they extend rights so that more people want to be a part of them, and things are more fair, and that there's like a broader base on which the state can be built, rather than like a teetering tower that is going to collapse.
Although I don't know if it's about rights, but for sure there is this issue of accumulating wealth and power. Wealth and power tends to accumulate like to the elites more and more and more. Like the pyramid of wealth distribution becomes more and more steep. Yeah, this seems to be universal. Doesn't matter. It's a democracy. It's a monarchy. Whether it's a capitalist system, whether it's a communist system, doesn't matter. The rich get richer, and the poor, if everything goes well, get richer as well, but not as quickly as the top class. So then you have some sort of upheaval. The wealth goes down, and the tensions are ready to explode.
Sure, right. Well, that's what happened. Like, rather than the people at the bottom of the pyramid seeing like their ability to work and earn a fair wage from that work, and the ability to socialize with who they want to socialize with, and buy property, practice religion, these things, like, these are rights. Like, rather than those things being supported, instead you just have this extraction of wealth from them. These people are being exploited. Wealth is being drawn away from them and taken to the top. And eventually those people become very upset and, the ratio to effort put in and the rewards taken out gets worse in those systems towards the end, especially, I think. Yeah, sure. That documentary I saw about India last night seems to point toward this happening, where there's an unimaginable amount of people without rights and like even basic income, or access to water, in this state. But yet the wealthy elites are just continuing to exploit them and extract and manipulate them and all these things. So it sounds like India's in a dire state. Anyway, let's talk about this metaphor then in terms of D&D. Has D&D fully exploited its user base? I would say no. We are not we're not much poorer for having played D&D. It's not, D&D isn't so expensive that we can't play it. Right? Like, it's still, as you said, like right now in this phase, it is still very cheap to play. Even with the books being completely overpriced like they are now, it's still
like relatively. You still, but you have to buy one book to play D&D. The monster manual is optional, kinda, but even this, like 2 books, you can play all the D&D you want.
Right, and if you amortize the $120 across 4 players playing 4 hours a week over a year, it's right. That is not
cheap,
much of an investment. Yeah. So, all right. So D&D doesn't seem to have extracted the wealth, but are there barbarians at the gate? Is there, are there armies capable of threatening or sacking D&D's Rome? No way. There's
arguably. It did happen, right? Pathfinder was the one. Well, you could argue that Pathfinder is D&D in broader sense, but I think there was a year that Pathfinder outsold D&D during the 4th edition days.
This is true.
So that sounds like an army to me, like a barbarian army.
But they have been dispersed and sent back to their farms and whatnot. Like Pathfinder is a shadow of what it was. And D&D has, in fact, from that threat, right, from that incursion onto the peninsula, they have become stronger. You're right. They came back. They heard the feedback regarding 4th edition versus Pathfinder and all this stuff, and they released this new version in 5th edition, which is spiritually seems closer to what folks want to play. Whether it's spiritually closer to what folks actually played, who knows?
So the Pathfinder would be the Celts that invaded and sacked Rome, and then 5th edition would be the Rome after that, which became way more militaristic and keen on building empires.
I see you're a student of history.
Somewhat. It's good to be a student of history.
I agree.
Everything, yeah.
So right now, D&D is growing in power. Like, it's growing in influence. The Wizards is. And, they're also supported. They have, like, Constantinople is not at war with D&D right now, like with D&D's Rome. Like, the Constantinople of Magic the Gathering is very, very powerful, and like it continues to grow and continues to generate a lot of wealth for Hasbro, which provided a lot of cover for D&D over the last 20 years to grow itself, right? Like D&D was always seen as like the Skunkworks, or like the kind of side project of Wizards of the Coast, and as long as Magic was generating money, then Hasbro didn't really worry about it. But now, D&D has come into its own. But so now it's these 2 twin engines of of influence and income. Like, they're both culturally very influential in their game spaces. Gaming is very influential in general. And they're both very profitable. Though we'll see. D&D sales have plateaued or even retracted in the last couple of years. They've attenuated the curve for 5th edition as much as possible, and this is what they're discussing right now. Is that this is what happens when you sell rule books? Is that you have this adoption curve that eventually tails off, and you long tail out, and then you have to recreate it. And so, which is why we'll probably see a switch to a hybrid digital game with a subscription service more closely linked to actual play rather than just like a character creator. We'll see them try to generate a more modern revenue model.
Yeah, I get the reasoning, but they did try it with D&D 4th edition. I think people don't remember, but there was plans to have a D&D 4th edition virtual tabletop to be a part of a play experience. So far, it looks very similar to what they did with 4th edition, so maybe the collapse will be there as well.
Yeah, maybe the technology's better than it
Yeah,
was.
the tools are there because back then I don't think Wizard had anything, and now there's like D&D and D&D Beyond, and there are successful virtual tabletops, so maybe it's different enough.
Right. They also have expertise in the house now. They've hired execs that have digital platform experience, like from Amazon and whatnot, whereas they had no experience to do for making digital products with D&D Fourth Edition. As far as I know, I could be missing someone, but
Although the last time I checked, the one D&D they advertised seemed very much like a video game. It seems they brought the video game mindset, and that they didn't really understood that the medium is different. So we'll see
yes.
whether they will learn the lessons or not. I'm wondering. I'm like, for sure it's an interesting thing to watch.
Yeah, I think that in order for D&D to continue to thrive and grow in at whatever rate, it must remain conversation based. It must remain, you know, a like core loop of us talking to one another, deciding what to do, and then interacting with the game. And that's a hard thing for a lot of people to understand who don't come from this world, because they, you know, they've seen games blow up that don't have anything like this in it, right? Where they are using, you know, reward and currency mechanics in like a Candy Crush game, or they're using, you know, physics style mechanics in like a Skyrim style game, you know, and so like unless people are familiar with this world, then they really don't understand like why the talking to one another is so important, and so they want to. I was going to say they want to get rid of it, right? They want to turn it more into a video game.
Yeah. Because when you listen to the trailer, like what do they mention? It's like, be whoever you want to be, like realize your fantasy of who you want to be, and make the game look cool. It's have all the animations and assets and visual effects. Those seem to be the two like major things they advertise, and this is not RPG. This is not D&D, I would argue. For most people.
I agree. I agree. Yeah.
Although maybe younger people see it this way. Maybe the culture has changed. Maybe it is way more like less about conversation and fiction and so on, but it's about the character I have created. Look, I am a tabaxi wizard warrior who's of this sexuality and this race, and just look at me. And the story, like actually playing and doing stuff, is not important. It's about the look at me. Like maybe I feel I'm already kind of too old to understand this culture. This is like the next generation, so I may have a blind spot for culture changes and what role-playing games could be.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I think that I think they really risk losing the thread if they turn it into something that's like, you know, moving digital objects in a visual, like a simulated visual space, and that's the primary method of play. Like that, I think that is it. I think they risk losing the thread because it's not very compelling. It's not a very interesting way to play a game. It's been done before and it's been done better. Like we could just play Diablo, right? Like Diablo is a highly tuned version of that, and right. Or if we want to play a more deeper role playing game, we could play Crusader Kings, right?
Yeah.
Like
or you could play like Divine Divinity 2, the Game Master mode. So it's basically this: you have assets. One person is a Game Master, has more control than the like strict rules of video game. Like this is basically this. Like it has been done before,
right? And it's been done better.
Is it going to be nothing but this? So I think they might also. The issue with assets, so if you do assets, if you do all the monsters with cool animations, what if the game master wants to use a monster that there's no asset for in the game? In a tabletop, there it is, a red dragon who has 3 heads and talks in Spanish. And he's gonna play riddles with you, and he's gonna change color over conversation to signify what mood is he in. And you have to judge based on the color, you have to adjust the conversation. That's it, done. Right. What do you do if you don't have the asset for the dragon in a game? You're just gonna run your goblins and orcs that you have bought. I'm assuming that's what they want. They want to produce a lot of assets and make players pay for them to use them.
Yep.
But
Probably.
are people gonna buy it? Like, just like, are they gonna buy into this way of playing D&D?
We shall see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although I haven't heard anything new from Wizards of the Coast, I'm not following it closely, but have they gone quiet? Maybe they did go back to the drawing board. Maybe they did after the OGL fiasco. They took a different approach.
Yeah, they didn't they release the OGL stuff as Creative Commons and go from there, and then I assume they're just working on the next edition, like in what format it's going to take. I saw that they wanted to incorporate AI and that they were going to charge $20 a month for a subscription.
Yes, make AI run games, basically.
No. I think they wanted the AI to like be the NPCs and things like that. That was the impression I got.
Okay.
I don't see what. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay. So, any quick thoughts about AI? Are AI game masters gonna be a thing, you think, in the future?
Yeah, they're going to be a thing, absolutely, in the next year or two.
Do you think there's a chance that AI will replace human game masters as a main way to play role-playing games?
No, the role-playing games are so small. Like traditional role-playing games, like a number of people who play them is tiny. Like they're estimating the total number of people who ever played D&D is 50 million people.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's like less than one Super Bowl broadcast. Like, right? Like
50 million, that's like Poland, basically. Like the country and the expats.
So, right. It's not, right. It's a medium-sized country. And so there are like 180 countries or something that we need to spread the word to. So like, in comparison to like, right, like a GTA style game, that's like 5 minutes of sales. Like it's and this is something that D&D has done over 50 years. It's so the potential audience for role-playing games is much bigger. That's just obvious. Like I don't have to be an exec at Wizards to see this. And so the AI game master has the chance to spread role-playing games out to that wider audience.
Okay. Yeah, that might be them.
The 10 million of us or whatever, 20 million folks who still play role-playing games in person, we will still play role-playing games in person. Nothing will change that.
Probably. It still might be like the board games still exist despite video games existing. And you could argue like, why would you play a board game? Make the computer do all of it. But they're growing. Like the board game market is in a golden age. I don't know if it's still in the golden age, but it's way bigger and better than it was 20 years ago.
Yeah, I think it's let us say plateaued. But it has it has grown immensely. Like especially the like the independent side of board games, and I don't know what Hasbro's like board game market has been doing. I think they've been growing too. That's not true. I do know they grew double digits for like a decade or something. So they did really well. And then we've seen an explosion of diversity in the board game market as well. So an increasing in the game mechanics quality and increasing the component quality. And digital games are not going to destroy role-playing games. Like if anything, it will just increase the opportunity to play them.
Hopefully. This seems like a good note to end on.
Sure.
So, thank you. Unless there's something you want to say. I know, a question or something you want to advertise.
Just, y'all can find me at burningwheel.com. You can email me at burningwheel@burningwheel.com. We have a Discord channel, so you'll have to email me to get the invite if you want to come talk to us. We're doing BurningCon in September. If any of y'all want to come, we're going to do 3 days of Burning Wheel and Burning Wheel games or related games. So if you want to come hang out with us for a weekend. But otherwise, I think we've covered just about everything.
Awesome. Thank you. It was awesome to have you here on this podcast. And all the good luck to you and your projects and stuff.
Yeah, man. Thank you. You too. Keep in touch. Let me know when this goes live, and we can talk about other stuff.
Awesome. Thanks. See ya. Bye.